Now, in 2026, the British royal family have a massive load of issues to deal with that they would, I am sure, like to keep behind closed palace walls and gates. King Charles, likely not long to reign while treating cancer, a robust William ready to take over, Kate fighting cancer. 2027 is the 30th anniversary of the death of Diana, and where do we even start with Andrew, looking so sweet and cheerful in the first film of this binge watch? After my jabbering, we open with a rather unique colour royal family review of 1969, when the firm was respected worldwide, had a commonwealth of consequence, and there were no known paedophiles and abusers that we were aware of. After this lovely set of rushes, there are 4 Liam Dale royal documentaries: Royal Romances, Royal Scandals, Princess Diana, and Royal Heritage, British Royalty Through the Ages. Giving the opportunity for you to learn more about the history of this unique family if you choose to keep watching. Much will change over the next year or two. Perhaps William is king, Andrew gets his comeuppance, Sarah gets arrested. Who knows? What we do know is the firm will be in the public eye for a long time to come. Let us hope, after thinning the herd, it can become a family of respect again.
I, Charles, Prince of Wales, do become your liege man of life and limb, and of earthly worship. And faith and truth I will bear unto thee, to live and die against all manner of folks.
All Wales welcomed Prince Charles as their own. This day, July the 1st, 1969, with its fanfares, its colour and royal dignity, is one that will long be remembered. It was perhaps the crowning occasion of a year which saw the emergence of Prince Charles and Princess Anne as active, indeed working members of the royal family. The ancient castle of Carnarvon became the focal point for millions. The ceremony of investiture, a symbol of the pride we have in our traditions and our royal family. In keeping with modern times, they have come closer to their peoples than ever before. It has been a busy, full year for the Queen and her family. We present some of its highlights. At Spithead, the Royal Yacht Britannia steamed proudly between the lines of NATO ships. One by one, they saluted the passing royal vessel. On board, the excitement of the occasion was shared with Princess Anne and Earl Mountbatten. A few weeks later, there was another nautical occasion at Tor Bay. The aircraft carrier HMS Eagle, flagship of the Western Fleet, lay at anchor surrounded by 38 sister ships. The fleet was to receive its new colours from Her Majesty. The ceremony was performed in one of the carrier's vast hangars. It was followed by a flypast. Out in the North Sea, the natural gas rig Amoco B welcomed Princess Anne aboard. She added a very feminine touch to the, until then, men-only rig. After changing into more suitable clothes, the princess saw for herself what goes on far from shore in the business of bringing Britain's new gas supply home. It was an informal, relaxed occasion and a personal success for the young princess. At Windsor Castle, the splendour of a formal event was typified by the state visit of President Giuseppe Saragat of Italy. Not for 60 years had the magnificent castle been used by a reigning monarch for such an occasion. The President and his daughter had come in friendship to be welcomed with equal cordiality by the Queen and her family on behalf of the nation. During the year, there were several royal visits overseas. A memorable one was to Austria, where the friendship between our two countries was further cemented by the Queen and Prince Philip. This was the first visit by British royalty to Austria for over half a century, an event which the Austrians made particularly memorable with a gift to the Queen of 2 Hufflinger ponies. The many receptions were on a lavish scale. Princess Anne attended her first cup final. From the royal box, she watched Leicester and Manchester City duel for the coveted trophy. The only goal in the match was a beauty. Neil Young clinched the game for Manchester City. Joe Mercer's great team stepped up to receive the cup from the young princess, whose introduction to cup final football couldn't have been better. North of the border, history was made in Edinburgh on the day when the Queen, accompanied by the Duke and Princess Anne, drove through the city streets to attend a General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. This was the first time since the union of the Scottish and English crowns in 1603 that a reigning sovereign would be present at such an assembly. With her husband and daughter close by, the Queen addressed the assembly with a message of hope for peace. It was in quest of world peace that President Nixon visited many countries after taking office. In London, he was informally invited to Buckingham Palace, where, during a family luncheon, as he said himself, he was captivated by the friendship and hospitality. 3 other famous Americans were also received at Buckingham Palace during the year. They were the man-on-the-moon team of Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Mike Collins. Armstrong, the first man on the moon, led the way at this historic meeting. Like the people of Britain, the royal family were proud to greet the space trio, especially so when Prince Edward and Prince Andrew. The Queen and Duke showed a keen knowledge and interest in the American moon program. The astronauts and their wives were made to feel very much at home. Once more, it was the turn of the Queen and her family to be welcomed to another country. At Bergen, in Norway, King Olaf received his visitors as they disembarked from the royal yacht. An irrepressible Prince Edward watched from Britannia as the Queen inspected the Guard of Honor. First stop in Bergen, on what was a holiday itinerary, was the house of Edvard Grieg, the great Norwegian composer. Another visit proved highly entertaining for all the family when the seals at Bergen Aquarium put on their own version of an aqua show. Horse racing is one of the Queen's favourite sports, and one of her happiest duties is to attend the Derby. Derby Day 1969 was cold and windy, but the weather couldn't cool the enthusiasm of the big crowd as the runners and riders made their way out onto the track. A day at the races is a pastime in which Her Majesty derives as much pleasure as many of her subjects. But one of the most memorable occasions in a busy royal year was one shared by thousands, visitors and Londoners alike. On a sunny day in June, the Queen celebrated her official birthday. The colour had been trooped. The soldiers marched back from Horse Guards Parade to Buckingham Palace. In their magnificent dress uniforms, the soldiers played their immaculate part. But this was also a day when the traditional and the modern were brought together. The British Concorde came to London. There was much excitement on the balcony of the palace as the roar of 16 RAF Lightnings heralded the arrival of Concorde 002. As ever, it had been a busy year in the Royal Derby. But what made it a special year was the shouldering of royal duties by Prince Charles and Princess Anne. Two young people became more and more an important part of a modern monarchy.
When you look back in history at royal romances, surprising as it may seem, few have happy ever after endings, and in many instances, the idea of love and marriage being inextricably linked is not quite as common as you might at first think. In fairy stories, handsome kings and princes regularly sweep fair maidens off their feet, transforming them into princesses and queens. And although a rarer occurrence, a royal princess can create a prince out of the most unpromising of characters. But in real life, as most of us know, the course of true love never runs smoothly, and in the case of so many highly publicised royal romances, past and present, the pursuit of love can be even more hazardous. The main reason for this is the significance of the royal romance when it comes to the line of succession, as every royal dynasty down through the ages has relied upon a healthy supply of legitimate heirs to consolidate its right to rule. The pressure this has put upon monarchs and monarchs-in-waiting to marry the most suitable princes or princesses isn't always a recipe for wedded bliss, although there have been occasions when prospective brides and grooms met each other for the first time on the way to the royal chapel, and went on to enjoy a long, happy, fulfilling, fruitful and faithful alliance. Now, should you be thinking that this all sounds very contrived and calculating, as images of the chivalrous King Arthur in full knightly attire astride a galloping white charger in search of Queen Guinevere spring to mind, you do sometimes have to delve a little deeper. And when it comes to romance, things aren't always as straightforward as history might at first glance suggest. Travelling around Great Britain, there are any number of locations that claim to be connected with the legendary king. From the mountains and valleys of Wales, over the mystical Bodmin Moor to the wild Cornish coast at Tintagel and Land's End. But if you're looking for Camelot, King Arthur's legendary court, where he presided over his magnificent round table, your journey could well bring you to this Roman fort at Caerleon in Gwent on one day and take you to the Great Hall at Winchester the next. And to confuse matters still further, the graves of Arthur and Guinevere can be found amongst the ruins at Glastonbury Abbey, or so the legend goes. The story of Arthur and Guinevere is still the foundation for many books and films, with each new generation that discovers this all-time great romance telling their own version of royal love and loss. Upon realising that King Arthur's most influential advisor was a magician called Merlin, it's evident that this is perhaps not the most fact-based of romances. But when the successful older king spotted the beautiful young Guinevere, he asked Merlin to make all the arrangements for a royal marriage. Merlin was reluctant to do so, as he could see into the future and believed any union between the pair was doomed. Even so, when pressed by the love-struck Arthur further against his better judgment, Merlin arranged the marriage, which was celebrated the length and breadth of the land. And one wedding gift was so well received, it's actually gone down in history, namely a certain round table given by the father of the bride, where Arthur's knights would all be given their place. All was well, until one of these knights, Sir Lancelot, fell in love with the Queen, who was quite literally swept off her feet by this knight in shining armour. Merlin's words of warning proved to be well founded, and King Arthur's Camelot was shattered. Arthur was killed in battle by one of his other knights, Sir Mordred, and legend has it that he sleeps beneath Cadbury Castle in Somerset, ready to return to save the nation if it's ever in danger again. In fact, whatever their differences in life, it's said that all of Arthur's knights are also sleeping here in case their services are ever needed. Interestingly, this hill is just a short distance from Glastonbury, making the graves amongst the abbey ruins rather redundant, nothing more than a good story promoted by the monks to bring them pilgrims and prosperity. Placing all this historically is rather tricky, as any evidence of a King Arthur belongs to the 5th century AD, just after the Romans left Britain. But the popular image we all have of Arthur and his queen is far more in keeping with the 12th century. This is because a Welsh bishop known as Geoffrey of Monmouth, in honour of the lovely border town where he originated, wrote the History of the Kings of Britain during the early 1100s, and where factual evidence was missing, he allowed his imagination to recreate the story. This just goes to show how careful we need to be with history. And when it comes to romance, there are many royal tales told that have been subject to fanciful interpretation over the years. So, after the classic love story of Arthur and Guinevere, we'll move on to a more accurately recorded era, well, at least for the times and places of births, marriages and deaths, if not for the more secret matters of the heart. While Geoffrey of Monmouth was busy writing about the kings of Britain's past in the 12th century, the royal family of his time were equally as fascinating as any of the stories he had to tell. For most people, Richard I, the Lionheart, is the best known king of this particular century. With his connections to the Robin Hood story, there's a great deal of romance surrounding him, but his own marriage to Berengaria of Navarre was far from successful, in part due to his constant absences away on the Crusades. It's been suggested, though, that this was not the reason for the lack of offspring, as some think that it was his wife's brother Sancho who was the real object of his affection, and the royal marriage was never actually consummated. It's therefore fair to say that Richard I is perhaps not the best of kings to feature in this programme, despite early indications to the contrary. And it is in fact Richard's father, Henry II, who's more to offer the true romantic in search of a king who knew how to woo the ladies. Even as a young man, Henry of Anjou was a handsome hero and a force to be reckoned with. His mother, Matilda, had been promised to the throne of England after the death of her father, Henry I, who made the Baron's promise to accept her as his heir. When he died, they reneged on the deal, and the crown passed to his nephew Stephen. This resulted in years of civil war that was only resolved when young Henry raised an army, and King Stephen agreed to name Matilda's son as his heir. Stephen died in 1154, and when Henry was crowned king at Westminster Abbey, the handsome French-born 21-year-old brought with him a queen, his French wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine. It was an interesting match, with the bride being about 11 years older than the groom, and she'd previously been married to the French sovereign Louis VII. Eleanor claimed she had thought to marry a king only to find she'd married a monk, and the charismatic, passionate, well-educated woman, who'd also been the most eligible heiress in all of France, sought an annulment from the Pope, which was granted on the grounds of consanguinity, that basically means they were too closely related. Ironically, she was even more closely related to Henry, her second husband, and if rumours are to be believed, she had an affair with his father before him, which resulted in Geoffrey of Anjou advising his son against marrying his chosen bride. It's possible that the chemistry between Eleanor and Henry was electric in the early days, but overall the marriage was as stormy as both of their personalities. That Henry was unfaithful to his queen is undisputed, and his choice of mistress was varied to say the least. The mother of his illegitimate son, Geoffrey, who went on to become Archbishop of York, was described by a medieval writer at Henry II's court as being a base-born common harlot who stooped to all uncleanliness. Henry also fathered illegitimate children with Alice of France, the daughter of Eleanor's former husband, Louis VII, and his second wife, Constance of Castile. And if that wasn't complicated enough, Henry was actually supposed to look after her, as she was betrothed to his son, Richard the Lionheart, of Robin Hood fame mentioned earlier. Over a period of 13 years, Eleanor provided Henry with 5 sons and 3 daughters. But by the time the last child, John, was born, the marriage was in effect over. Again, this hardly sounds like a first-rate romance, but one of the major factors in the deterioration of Eleanor and Henry's marriage was a lady who we know very little about, generally referred to as the Fair Rosamond, who the king was quite openly head over heels in love with. To discover more, we need to travel to the beautiful Gloucestershire countryside where England meets Wales. Their border regions, known as the Welsh Marches, were controlled by the Marcher lords, often of Norman descent, with strong ties to the English kings, and Henry II met his Fair Rosamond while visiting her father, a Marcher lord. This wonderful manor house, a former Cistercian abbey in the Forest of Dean, was built on land granted by Henry II, and while records exist of later monarchs staying at the abbey while hunting in the royal forest, there's been speculation that Henry and Rosamond might have met in secret here when the king was in the district. Nevertheless, this royal love story is most frequently associated with Woodstock in Oxfordshire, where the magnificent Blenheim Palace stands today. Long before the classical architecture of Vanbrugh dominated the scene, Henry installed Rosamond in a lodge here. Legend has it that Eleanor discovered what's become known as Fair Rosamond's boa, and the jealous queen is alleged to have poisoned her rival, who died in 1176. Although a good story, this is unlikely to be true, as Eleanor was spending more time away from Henry, attending to her lands in France, with the royal couple having in reality all but separated. As time passed, she took revenge on her philandering husband by turning his sons, especially her favourite Richard, against him, which eventually led to Henry's downfall and death at the age of 56. It's been reported that when Henry had no choice but to make peace with his son Richard, he secretly whispered, "May the Lord never permit me to die until I have taken due vengeance upon you." The Queen of Aquitaine had over time proved to be more than a match for her unfaithful husband, and as she outlived both Henry II and their son Richard I, dying at the incredible age of 82, her influence as the Dowager Queen continued into the 13th century, making Eleanor a veritable tigress to her son's lion heart. Down through the ages, it's unusual to find a queen with the wealth, power, survival skills, and sheer manipulative cunning of Eleanor of Aquitaine. And as we move on 300 years to the time of King Henry VIII, you can't help wondering if this much-married monarch had found himself with a wife of Eleanor's mettle, history might not have had a very different outcome. When Richard III of the Royal House of York famously cried, a horse, a kingdom for a horse," in the version of events dramatised by the great bard of Avon, William Shakespeare, he was engaged in the fearsome Battle of Bosworth Field. If popular legend is to be believed, in a fight to the death with Henry Tudor of the House of Lancaster, the crown, which Richard had worn into battle, fell from his head just before he was killed. Symbolically, the crown was retrieved from a bush and placed upon his victorious opponent's head, ending the War of the Roses, fought between the Yorkists and the Lancastrians for 30 years. To unite the two houses, the newly crowned King Henry VII went on to marry Elizabeth of York, and as the first Tudor king chose a rose emblem that combined the white rose of Lancaster with the red rose of York. As a new royal dynasty, the line of succession was extremely important, but it proved advantageous that Henry VII had produced an heir and a spare, because his eldest son Arthur died, and the title of Prince of Wales passed to his second son Henry, along with Arthur's widow, Catherine of Aragon. It was the old king's dying wish that Henry VIII should marry the Spanish-born Catherine of Aragon, and the wedding took place just a fortnight before his coronation at Westminster Abbey in 1509. Catherine was older than her bridegroom, and a special dispensation had to be given by the Pope in Rome for the marriage to take place, even though Catherine declared that due to their youth, the union with Arthur had never been consummated. At this time, Henry was nothing like the usual images we have of him in older age, being just 18, handsome, cultured and athletic. Queen Catherine without doubt adored him, and although aware that the king was often unfaithful to her, she remained constant to her husband her whole life long. It was an arrangement that would probably have suited both parties very well, had it not been for the fact that of the 6 children born to them, only one survived, with the added misfortune of being a girl. The Tudor dynasty required certainty, and the last time the crown had been destined for a female heir, Matilda, the result had been civil war when her cousin Stephen usurped her. As Catherine went beyond childbearing age, Henry turned to the Pope for an annulment, believing that the marriage was cursed because his queen had been his brother's widow. However, as the Vatican had allowed the union by virtue of a special dispensation to get around this in the first place, they were hardly going to agree with Henry, which would mean admitting that they'd got it wrong. Never a man to accept no for an answer, Henry broke away from Rome, made himself head of a new Protestant Church of England, and granted himself a divorce so that he could marry Anne Boleyn, who was already expecting his child. Although Catherine always refused to accept the divorce despite being separated from her daughter and forced to live without the comforts she was used to, in her heart she believed Henry would return to her. When Anne's child proved to be another girl, and efforts to produce a son were fruitless, the methods the desperate queen is alleged to have employed to achieve this resulted in her being sent to the Tower of London and executed for high treason in 1536, the year that the spurned Queen Catherine died. As we all know, Henry went on to marry again, and with his next wife, Jane Seymour, produced the son and heir the Tudor king had so longed for. It's possible love would have blossomed between them had she not died as a result of the birth, and the wives that followed failed to capture the ageing Henry's heart. When Henry VIII died, his only son succeeded him, but the Tudor line was anything but secure. The scramble for power was far from dignified, and it was only when the crown finally reached Henry's daughter, Elizabeth, the child of Anne Boleyn, that the stability of the Tudor dynasty was assured. Elizabeth I ruled for an incredible 45 years, and is a source of great fascination, not least because she chose never to marry. She was surrounded by suitors, yet steadfastly refused to make the ultimate commitment to any of them. At that time, if she'd married, all her wealth, power and position would have passed to her husband, and she learnt while she was still very young that she was being targeted by men who coveted her power. After Henry died, the then Princess Elizabeth became the ward of her father's surviving wife, Catherine Parr. Interestingly, when Henry had noticed Catherine, more for her compassion to care for him as his health deteriorated than for her sexual prowess, she'd been in love with Thomas Seymour, the brother of Henry's third wife, Jane, but it would not have been wise for her to say no to the king. So, not surprisingly, within months of Henry's death, Catherine and Thomas married, giving Seymour intimate access to Elizabeth, and there's speculation that his attentions towards the young, impressionable girl were not altogether appropriate. When Catherine died in childbirth a year later, without doubt Thomas Seymour planned to marry the future Queen Elizabeth. But when this didn't work out, he changed tack and tried to kidnap Elizabeth's half-brother, the boy King Edward VI. Consequently, Seymour was caught and sent to the Tower of London on charges of high treason, where he was eventually executed, and legend has it that Elizabeth was heard to comment, "Today died a man with much wit and not much judgment." Elizabeth had perhaps had a lucky escape and was evidently very cautious when she came to the throne. Some have suggested that as the love of her life, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, was already married, the new queen vowed she'd have no other husband. Also, her cousin Mary Queen of Scots had been turned into nothing more than a pawn in an elaborate and deadly political game as a result of an unwise marriage to Lord Darnley, and when he was eventually murdered, rather than learning from her mistakes, she made another equally disastrous marriage. The consequence of this action was the imprisonment of the Scottish Queen by Elizabeth for almost 20 years, when she finally signed Mary's death warrant as her Catholic cousin had become too much of a threat, alleged to be at the heart of conspiracy after conspiracy. Whether Elizabeth was a virgin in the true sense of the word is impossible to say. Even so, that she loved passionately is beyond question. But like the Elizabeth that would follow her centuries later, this Tudor queen put service to her people and her country first, and England prospered. What happened after her passing, even she couldn't control. Although, ironically, Elizabeth named her cousin Mary Queen of Scots' only son heir to her throne. As any good history book will tell you, the Tudors were followed by the Stuarts, and although James I, son of Mary Queen of Scots, united England and Scotland, both he and Charles I, the son who followed him, were clever men who proved to be disastrous kings. Charles I was a great believer in the divine right of kings and refused to listen to Parliament until, of course, it was too late. Led by Oliver Cromwell, the parliamentarians launched a civil war against the king and his royalist supporters, which resulted in the execution of Charles I, leaving the nation subject to the puritanical protection of Oliver Cromwell, who even outlawed Christmas. Needless to say, when the Commonwealth under Cromwell's control came to an end in 1660, the people of Britain were ready for some decadence and fun. When Charles II returned from exile in France to be restored to the throne, the Merry Monarch, as the handsome Charles was known, led by example. He's most famous for having a succession of high-profile mistresses, but his favourite was, without doubt, the actress Nell Gwynn. Instead of turning the people of Britain against him, Charles's popularity rose to new heights for loving a commoner. It's alleged that on his deathbed, the king's last words were, "Let not poor Nelly starve." And Charles's successor, his brother James II, paid off Nell's mortgage, all her debts, and granted her a substantial pension, which does add credence to the tale. Despite Charles II producing a plethora of illegitimate offspring, he lacked an heir apparent, which is why his brother succeeded him. However, this did weaken the House of Stuart considerably, and after the demise of Charles II's nieces, the people of Britain were told, "Queen Anne's dead," and with her, so was the Stuart hold on the throne. And at last, we come to a genuine royal love story between a king and a queen, who met each other for the first time at St. James's Palace 6 hours before they were married in 1761. The bridegroom was King George III of the Royal House of Hanover, and his bride was Princess Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. It seems the couple had similar tastes, sharing a love of the countryside, and the king, often known as Farmer George, was fascinated by anything to do with agriculture. The happy pair produced a huge family, consisting of 15 children, and despite almost every king to have gone before him keeping a fine collection of mistresses, this deeply religious George remained faithful to Queen Charlotte throughout their marriage. But if you're expecting a happy ending, you're going to be sadly disappointed. In 1788, the king's behaviour became very strange, and many believed him to be mad. A later episode found him addressing a mighty oak tree as the King of Prussia, and eventually his eldest son, the future George IV, took over as Prince Regent in 1811. What it now appears he was suffering from was the physical illness porphyria, which manifested itself as madness, and as her husband faded before her eyes, the once gracious Queen Charlotte became increasingly depressed and actually died 2 years before George III did. Now, although when it came to womanising as Prince Regent and King, George IV was notorious, whether or not he ever actually found love is difficult to say. Ironically, his younger brother William, who succeeded him because George IV had produced no legitimate heir, fared rather better in love, albeit his liaisons were equally as scandalous. William IV was king for just 6 days short of 7 years, and already 61 when he came to the throne. A naval man known for his colourful language and a forthright lack of tact, despite the nickname Silly Billy, endeared himself to the great British people, being far more down to earth than his older brother. But when it came to the ladies, like Charles II, William had a very public affair with an actress, which lasted for 22 years, and as depicted in this cartoon by the political satirist of the day James Gilray, resulted in 10 illegitimate children. But there is another love story which involves William, while still Duke of Clarence, that is far less well known, and we've travelled to the beautiful county of Gloucestershire once again to visit the magnificent Berkeley Castle. No stranger to royal scandal, this is where the unfortunate King Edward II was murdered way back in the 14th century, and throughout history this has been one ancestral seat with more than its fair share of colourful characters. And it was a very interesting Countess of Berkeley who's thought to have attracted the Duke of Clarence's attention back in the early 1800s. Mary Cole was a butcher's daughter from Gloucester, who rose considerably above her station in life to marry Frederick Augustus, the 5th Earl of Berkeley, in 1796. However, a number of their children were born well before this date, but it was claimed that an earlier wedding had taken place, generating considerable legal wrangling over the validity, and there were even suggestions that the parish records in Berkeley's Church of St. Mary were tampered with. When the Earl died in 1810, while questions over which children were legitimate were being asked, Mary was evidently a very attractive widow. This was at the time when the Prince of Wales became Prince Regent, and a few years later the future George IV's only legitimate heir, Princess Charlotte, died in childbirth. It also coincided with a period of financial trouble for William, and with no heir apparent, the race was on amongst all the sons of George III to come up with a healthy, legitimate offspring to carry on the line of succession. William left the actress Dorothea Jordan, with whom he'd had 10 children, and started the search for a wealthy, suitable wife. The Countess of Berkeley had produced 12 children, so was obviously fertile, and it's highly likely that the lovely Mary was as down-to-earth as the Duke of Clarence was, and it's probable they would have done very well together. But here's the irony. Although William had enjoyed a blissful existence with his actress mistress, not to mention the bedroom antics of his brother, the Prince Regent, it was felt the Countess of Berkeley would bring the monarchy into disrepute because of the legitimacy issues connected with her children. So the future King William IV married a suitable princess, Adelaide of Saxe-Meiningen, but the 2 daughters the union produced died in infancy, and the throne passed to William's 18-year-old niece, Victoria, daughter of his younger brother, the Duke of Kent, when he died in 1837. Although the most commonly perceived image we have of Queen Victoria is that of a stern elderly lady dressed from head to toe in black, when she came to the throne she was a lovely young girl, and immediately thoughts turned to finding a suitable bridegroom. The preference for Victoria's first cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, was confirmed when the couple met for a second time in 1839, having first encountered each other 3 years earlier. Evidently, the new queen approved of Albert, describing him as so sensible, so kind, so good and so amiable, with the added bonus of the most pleasing and delightful exterior and appearance you could possibly see. In fact, the couple were married at St. James's Palace on the 10th of February 1840, after Victoria had proposed to Albert, as protocol demanded of a reigning monarch. Despite its undoubted convenience, this was a royal marriage based on love, making it, as this programme has demonstrated, something of a rarity. 9 children were born to the happy couple between 1840 and 1857, as family values were restored to the nation after the long run of wild living princes and kings. Today, many of us associate this period of history with Christmas, and we owe some of our best-loved seasonal traditions to the gifts bestowed by the German-born Prince Albert upon his wife and family. The most famous of these has to be the Christmas tree, which Albert arranged as a special surprise. For centuries, the Germans had decorated trees in a midwinter festival, covering the bare branches of mighty oaks with brightly coloured rags to encourage the tree spirits to return and make the leaves grow again. Eventually, with the arrival of Christianity, this practice was moved to Christmas, with a fir tree substituted for the oak, thanks to its triangular shape representing the Father, Son and Holy Ghost. Further adornments were added when the priest Martin Luther used candles on a fir tree for a special Christmas Eve service, and when Prince Albert presented his family with a beautifully decorated tree, it was an act of love and very romantic indeed. When news of the royal Christmas tree reached the people of Britain, the next year everybody wanted one. And since Victoria's reign, no traditional Christmas would be considered complete without a festively decorated tree. Where the royal family led, the rest of the nation was bound to follow, and another of Prince Albert's loving gifts to Queen Victoria further encouraged a great British summer tradition. The concept of a seaside holiday had been popular since Georgian times, and Prince Albert was instrumental in creating the magnificent Osborne House on the Isle of Wight as a royal seaside retreat for his hard-working wife. The Isle of Wight became a popular destination for holidaymakers, but the royal retreat remained extremely private, and even today you can still find evidence of how Victoria and Albert, accompanied by their children, enjoyed the pleasures of the Isle of Wight. The nearest village to Osborne is Whippingham, and the magnificent church of St Mildred was where the royal family worshipped when they were in residence. Also, the row of almshouses opposite the church were built on Queen Victoria's instructions for the retired royal servants from the Osborne estate, making this a surprising find along an incredibly quiet single-track country lane. For Victorian visitors to the Isle of Wight, the advent of steam and the creation of the railway provided a most popular means of transport, and Queen Victoria herself travelled by train around the island. Part of the railway system has been restored by the Isle of Wight Steam Railway Society, and with their prized collection of Victorian railway carriages, their headquarters at Haven Street is a delightful destination. However, you won't find any steam engines stopping at Whippingham, despite the fact that the station building still stands. This was actually Queen Victoria and the royal family's own private station in the 19th century, and a short walk along the peaceful footpath will uncover traces of the old platform where once upon a time, not all that long ago, a happily married royal couple alighted from a stylish carriage to hide from the world and enjoy a seaside holiday with their children. With the strict demands of protocol, it must have been a strain at times for Prince Albert to be head of the household when his wife was the Queen. Yet there are plenty of memorials to Prince Albert in his own right, with the most grand built upon the orders of Victoria. If proof were needed that the Queen adored her husband, when this promising royal love story came to a tragically abrupt end, with Albert's death in 1861 at the age of 42, Victoria wore funeral black for the rest of her life. For 13 years, Victoria went into deep mourning and refused to appear in public, retreating to Osborne and the other home Prince Albert had rebuilt for her at Balmoral in Scotland whenever she could. In fact, so complete was Victoria's withdrawal from her people that there was even talk of the abolition of the monarchy. But there was one man who is thought to have been instrumental in restoring Queen Victoria to her waiting public, a Scottish servant by the name of John Brown. Much has been written on the subject, and it's alleged that there was even a secret marriage between this mismatched couple, with satirists of the day referring to the Queen as Mrs. Brown. Whatever the true facts, Queen Victoria had a passionate love affair with Scotland, and even the prime ministers that served her were forced to travel north of the border on occasion to seek an audience with Her Majesty. Without doubt, her favourite was Benjamin Disraeli, who she much preferred to his main rival William Gladstone, who she loathed. Although there's no suggestion of impropriety here, it does go to illustrate how Queen Victoria developed strong attachments to certain people, relying on them both personally and professionally. Nevertheless, it was a lock of John Brown's hair that she allegedly requested her doctor place in her coffin, and when she died in 1901, the secret of whatever happened between the Queen and John Brown was buried with her. Queen Victoria's fondness for her favourites and lack of amusement with those who displeased her is legendary, and even her own children were not exempt from her wrath. The Prince of Wales, her eldest son Bertie, was constantly out of favour with his mother, in part because she blamed him for the early death of his father, her beloved Prince Albert. And when it came to the Prince of Wales's feelings for his mother, a lifetime facing her disapproval perhaps fueled his wild behaviour rather than curbed it. In fact, when she died, one of the first things the 59-year-old did was give Osborne House to the nation, supposedly as a memorial to his mother. However, it's been suggested that the new King Edward VII was thrilled to get rid of the house where he'd been so dominated. King Edward VII is perhaps best known for keeping a succession of glamorous mistresses, and whether or not he was truly in love with any woman is very hard to judge. No doubt the most eminent psychiatrist of the day, Sigmund Freud, would have had much to say on the subject, but although the king may have struggled with love, he certainly inspired others, namely his people, his mistresses, and most of all his wife, Queen Alexandra. Whatever her husband's well-publicised misdemeanours, the elegant and dignified Danish princess he'd had the good sense to marry stood resolutely at his side, taking consolation in the fact that she believed the king always loved her best. moving into the early 20th century, one of the most famous royal romances of all times resulted in a marriage, but also threatened the monarchy and brought about the abdication of King Edward VIII in 1936. The object of Edward's affections was an American divorcee, Wallis Simpson, who he was determined to marry as soon as she was free. Britain as a nation was shocked and felt that the American socialite had stolen their king. Some suggest that Edward had found a convenient way of shirking his royal duties, while others are of the opinion that this was indeed true love, and the king had been braver than those of his predecessors who'd settled for a marriage of convenience and a string of mistresses. As Duke and Duchess of Windsor, Edward and Wallis lived in exile in Paris and were only parted when the Duke died from throat cancer in 1972. As our time looking at royal romances draws to a close, we couldn't possibly conclude without considering the most widely publicised royal romance of all time between Charles, His Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales, and Lady Diana Spencer. Ironically, had Edward VIII ruled as king, married a suitable lady and produced an heir, Prince Charles may never have found himself first in line to the British throne. When he was just 3 years old, his mother became Queen Elizabeth II, and by the time the prince had come of age, every press agency in the world was speculating about who the eligible young royal would marry. Prince Charles certainly seemed to be in no hurry to find a bride, but shortly after his 30th birthday, he met the shy youngest daughter of Earl Spencer of Althorpe, Lady Diana. With an impeccable ancestry, Diana had been born on the royal estate at Sandringham before moving to Althorpe in Northamptonshire when her father inherited the title Earl Spencer. After a brief spell at finishing school, Diana bought herself a flat in fashionable Fulham and flourished as a children's nanny, a job that she loved. Before long, it wasn't only Prince Charles who'd been captivated by Diana. The British public started a love affair with the future Princess of Wales that would last for all time. It was a 20th century fairy story come true, and when Diana left Buckingham Palace, a lady to marry her Prince Charming under the huge dome of St. Paul's Cathedral, on the 29th of July 1981, she returned a princess to the delight of the cheering crowds. London was in a mood to celebrate the royal wedding that heralded a new age in the history of the British monarchy. In a few short years, the new Princess of Wales blossomed into a delightful young woman with a unique style of her own. And after the birth of two sons, Prince William and Harry had secured the succession and fulfilled one of her most important royal duties as a future queen. But things were not all that they might have seemed, and eventually both Buckingham Palace and the British government had to admit that the romance was over, and the Prince and Princess of Wales were divorced in 1996. And as we all know, this was not the end of the story. Even stripped of her HRH status, Diana, Princess of Wales, was still adored wherever she went, and for just the briefest of moments, it appeared that she was succeeding in building a new life for herself. Then tragedy struck on a Paris night in August 1997, when Diana was killed in a car crash, along with her companion, Dodi Al-Fayed, and their driver. The outpouring of public grief and the dignified funeral of the young woman who'd changed the face of British royalty proved beyond question just how adored Diana had been, and when she was finally laid to rest on a peaceful island in the middle of the oval lake at Althorpe, her ancestral home, the nation vowed never to forget Diana, Princess of Wales. It's a promise that's been kept, and as the years go by, visitors to Althorpe in Northamptonshire and the London residences that Diana called home, from the charming flat in Coleherne Court to the regal elegance of Kensington Palace, we are constantly reminded that Diana, the people's princess, once passed this way. The fairy tale may not have ended as everyone, not least Charles and Diana, had hoped, but this story nonetheless qualifies as a royal romance of its time. Throughout history, there have been many more royal romances than those featured in this programme, and in truth, so long as the monarchy survives, there'll be many more to come. Ironically, it isn't only the members of the royal families of the past for whom true love ran smoothly who are most fondly remembered, because, just as is the case in popular novels, when it comes to romance, whether royal or otherwise, there's always room for secrets and intrigue, alongside the hearts and flowers. There are some who would argue that in the 21st century, a monarchy of any description is an outdated institution, but paradoxically, it only takes the merest hint of a royal scandal or conspiracy for the world press to be in hot pursuit of the story. What's more, any newspaper or magazine fortunate enough to get a royal exclusive, even in our modern age, is guaranteed to increase circulation dramatically, suggesting that there is as much interest in the monarchy as there's ever been. So how did it all begin? Well, for the British, the answer to that question is quite simply when the first kings and queens emerged from the warring tribes of ancient times to wear a crown and sit upon a throne. However, they had to do a great deal more than that. Kings, or queens for that matter, had to be fierce warriors, not only to seize power, but also to withstand challenges from their fellow countrymen and foreign invaders, and the term hostile takeover back then meant precisely that. In today's multicultural society, we can all claim very different ancestries, and whether black-haired, dark-eyed Celts, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Anglo-Saxons, or in more recent times of Asian and African extraction, the melting pot of diverse peoples that make up the British Isles creates an ever-changing anthropological landscape. The first invaders to really make an impact were the Romans, who arrived in force in 43 AD. The ancient Britons fought hard to resist, the most remembered being the mighty warrior queen Boudica, who certainly gave the Romans a very tough time, even though it was to no avail. But there was little conspiracy or scandal at play. These were brutal times, where rising to power was a dangerous business, and if someone was plotting against you, little was done to hide it. Nevertheless, the Romans were an altogether more sophisticated bunch than the ancient Britons, and you only have to look at their legacy of long straight roads, fine architecture, and beautiful baths to appreciate this. And when it came to conspiracies, they were centuries ahead of their time. As we all know, Julius Caesar, who first set foot in Britain before the main Roman invasion, crying, "I came, I saw, I conquered," in point of fact, came to nothing more than a very sorry end, stabbed to death on the steps of the Forum in Rome by those he'd thought were his closest friends. Eventually, the scandals and conspiracies in the Roman Empire, which were as lethal as they were legendary, proved to be a major factor in Rome's downfall, and as they departed Britain's shores in the 5th century AD, there were other invaders ready to take their place. The first of these were the Saxons, and it took them just over 2 centuries to force the native Celts out of England into Scotland and Wales, before splitting the nation further into 7 kingdoms. This was still a bloodthirsty age, and each successive king fought for dominance over his neighbours, until finally Egbert of Wessex became the first acknowledged king of all England in 829. When Egbert died, he was succeeded by his sons and grandsons, rather than the 7 kingdoms once again going into battle for supremacy, and the concept of a line of succession has been an integral part of the monarchy ever since. But naturally, because there were plenty of would-be kings who were not the heir apparent, or even the heir presumptive, the motivation for some of the greatest scandals and conspiracies in the history books took shape alongside the notion of a hereditary monarchy. As the centuries passed, and the Anglo-Saxon kings were toppled by marauding Vikings, only to be restored to the throne again, some monarchs proved excellent, while others were worse than useless. However, the next big change came when King Edward the Confessor died in 1066. Now, although you might not know much about this king, the date will be very familiar as the year of the Battle of Hastings, which came about because Edward, who died childless, allegedly promised the English throne to 2 different people: his brother-in-law Harold, who the conspiracy theorists believe the old king disliked intensely, and his distant cousin William, Duke of Normandy. Quickly Harold stormed to power, but when William brought an invasion force from France to dispute the succession, he defeated Harold at the Battle of Hastings, and the Norman conquests changed the face of Britain and the aristocracy beyond recognition. William I, or the Conqueror as he's better known, surrounded himself with Norman nobles, but subduing the English was no easy task, and he still had his lands in Normandy to oversee. In fact, he died in France while attacking the city of Nantes. Now, as you might guess, tact and diplomacy didn't play a huge part in the Norman conquests, but And William I, like all of his predecessors, had a big problem. He couldn't live forever. Unlike Edward the Confessor, though, he had an heir and a number of other sons, but he thought the eldest wasn't tough enough to rule England, so he chose William, his third son, to succeed him. A recipe for conspiracy if ever there was one. William II died in very suspicious circumstances, and was succeeded very speedily by his brother Henry I, whose reign ended when he died of food poisoning. It's believed Henry may have been involved in William's death, but this early history proves beyond doubt that when the succession isn't clearly defined, there's always going to be trouble. For most people, the best-known example of royal brothers conspiring and fighting amongst themselves to decide who should become king is that of Richard the Lionheart and his brother John, not least because of their appearance in the legend of Robin Hood. Part of the problem in this instance was the refusal of their father, King Henry II, to name his heir, setting son against son, as conspiracy became as important a part of the line of succession as birthright. Matters were further aggravated because the mother of both Richard and John, Eleanor of Aquitaine, wasn't averse to taking sides, and as her marriage to their father had deteriorated into a veritable war zone, she actively encouraged Richard, her favourite, to take up arms against his father. When Henry II died at the French castle of Chinon in 1189, he'd finally named Richard, his third son, as his heir. And so began a period of history dominated by crusader knights, holy quests, and ubiquitous damsels in distress. The legend of Robin Hood tells the story of the noble Robin of Locksley, a supporter of King Richard the Lionheart and his crusades to the Holy Land. When Robin returned from the Crusades, he found that King Richard's brother John had taken charge of the country, raising taxes to fill his own pockets, leaving the English people facing extreme poverty and starvation. And to make matters worse, Prince John and his greedy nobles had confiscated the lands of those away fighting the Crusades with King Richard, including, of course, the property of Robin of Locksley. Robin turned outlaw to wreak revenge on John, and joined together with other like-minded outlaws in Sherwood Forest, plotting to remove the usurping prince from power and restore King Richard's throne. Robin, his band of merry men, and the fair maid Marian stole from the rich, namely Prince John and his cronies, to give to the poor, the wronged citizens of the nation. Eventually, just in the nick of time, King Richard returned to send his wicked brother packing, and Richard's grateful subjects rejoiced at their liberation from Prince John's tyranny. It's a wonderful story, and has become so much a part of popular culture that Richard the Lionheart has gone down in history as one of the greatest kings of all time, while his brother John, who did actually succeed Richard after his death in 1199, is often referred to as Bad King John. However, delve a little deeper and you'll find a very different version of events. Richard the Lionheart ruled England for 10 years. He was only ever actually in the country for a total of 7 months. It was Richard and not John who raised most of the taxes to fund the Crusades and pay for his ransom when he managed to get himself captured by the Emperor of Germany. Whether Prince John, as he then was, played any part in the abduction of his brother is frequently speculated about, but has never been proved. And as Richard failed to produce an heir, no doubt as a direct result of always being away fighting or in prison, the crown eventually passed to John anyway. If John did conspire against his brother Richard, when he came to the throne, he certainly got a taste of his own medicine, when the nobility rebelled against him, forcing the signing of Magna Carta, which prohibited any abuse of royal power by King John or future monarchs. And in the real history books, rather than the tales of Robin Hood, this is what he's most remembered for. To say that Richard the Lionheart wasn't all good and King John wasn't all bad is probably the fairest assessment of these two kings. However, as we all love a courageous, handsome hero and a deliciously evil villain, chances are that the legend as told in Robin Hood will live on, because inevitably the truth will never be allowed to get in the way of this particularly good story. Having explored the scandal and conspiracy of sibling rivalry, we move on in time to the grandson of King John, and a family history with far too many skeletons in the cupboard. Our story begins with the father of this unhappy dynasty, Edward I, who became king in 1272. At 2 meters tall, he was nicknamed Longshanks, as he stood head and shoulders above the majority of his countrymen, and was, without doubt, a warrior king. Near neighbours Scotland and Wales certainly discovered this to their cost. And Edward's deviousness and brutality have become legendary, in part due to the success of the blockbuster movie Braveheart, which tells the story of William Wallace and his valiant attempt to liberate Scotland from English rule. But yet again, when we come to the question of the succession, the son, who Longshanks created Prince of Wales in 1301, had always been something of a disappointment to his confrontational father. Edward II couldn't have been more different from Edward I, and with the benefit of hindsight, his homosexuality was a major factor in the troubles that beset him. Warring with Scotland was of little interest to him, and after his father's death, when the Scots took on the English at the Battle of Bannockburn, Edward's army was beaten and the independence of Scotland assured. And so we come to Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire, where Edward II was brutally murdered in the most horrific circumstances.
Expected to do his duty, Edward married Isabella of France, and despite his obvious preference for male company, the union produced 4 children. However, Isabella has gone down in history as a woman scorned, and when she took her revenge on Edward II, the fury of hell would have been mild by comparison. When Isabella fell in love with Roger Mortimer, a sworn enemy of the king, the trouble really started. The pair deposed Edward and had him imprisoned in this cell at Berkeley Castle, and seized power in the name of the heir apparent who would later become Edward III. The king's closest male friends were murdered, and when Edward II failed to die quietly as a result of the noxious fumes from the rubbish pit below his prison cell, he was traditionally disemboweled on the orders of his wife, the conventional and gruesome death preserved for homosexuals back in the 14th century. Ironically, when Edward III was old enough to seize power back from his mother, he went on to become a very good king. But when it comes to scandal and conspiracy, it's another Edward, this time the 5th, who's at the heart of a mystery still unsolved to this day. A visit to the Tower of London will reveal the sad tale of the 2 princes, one of whom was destined to be Edward V, who, with his younger brother, was in the care of their uncle Richard, the Duke of Gloucester. On his deathbed, King Edward IV appointed Richard England's protector, and the evidence suggests this would, to use a biblical analogy, have been like entrusting the care of the newborn baby Jesus to King Herod. The 2 princes were last seen in September 1483 at the Tower, and the finger of suspicion pointed accusingly at their uncle, the Duke of Gloucester, who, in the absence of the 2 princes, became King Richard III. Some argue that history has unfairly maligned Richard III, and William Shakespeare's play on the subject did little for the king's PR. But for those who believe in divine justice, his reign lasted just 2 years, before he was killed at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. The man responsible for the demise of Richard took the empty throne of England and began a new royal house as Henry VII, the first of the Tudor kings. However, although more than capable of scheming and conniving in his own right, it was his second son, Henry, who turned royal scandal and conspiracy into an art form. Although looking at the history books, it appears that Henry VIII was obsessed with women, it was in fact the old problem of the succession and producing a healthy male heir that preoccupied him most. When Henry became king, he inherited the widow of his older brother Arthur, Catherine of Aragon, and a special dispensation from the Pope in Rome allowed them to marry. Sadly for Henry, Catherine failed to produce a son, and despite numerous pregnancies, her only child to survive was a girl, Mary. By this time, Henry realised that Catherine's childbearing days were over, and turned his attention to the young and bewitching Anne Boleyn. Henry now wanted the Pope to overturn his agreement to the marriage with Catherine, so there could be an annulment and the king would be able to marry Anne. The Pope, however, refused, so Henry decided to break from Rome, become head of a new Protestant Church of England, and grant himself a divorce, after which he married Anne, who was already pregnant. But after all that effort, Anne's child was a girl, Elizabeth, and despite Henry hoping future pregnancies would result in a son, nature didn't oblige, and Anne was swiftly dispatched, accused of adultery, and beheaded. Henry's next choice of wife did produce a son, but as she died as a result of the achievement, Henry continued to marry and divorce or behead at will, having an incredible 6 wives in all, before his own death in 1547. With a new church and boy king, Henry's hopes of a secure succession were left unrealised when Edward VI died in 1553 at the age of 15. And the Catholics, who'd constantly plotted to restore England to Rome, were ready to support Henry's eldest daughter, Mary, a devout Catholic, in her bid for the throne. The Protestants, however, fought back, manipulating the 16-year-old Lady Jane Grey onto the throne of England, but the unfortunate girl, merely a pawn in an elaborate conspiracy, was deposed by Mary after just 9 days and sent to the Tower of London as a traitor, where she was later executed. For the Protestants, Bloody Mary, as the new queen became known, lived up to her name, executing as heretics those who refused to convert back to Rome. Plots and conspiracies sprung up everywhere, and as Mary's marriage to Philip of Spain failed to produce any issue, the Catholics feared that their power would die with Mary. While Mary was still alive, the Catholics had urged the Queen to execute her half-sister, Elizabeth, the Protestant daughter of Anne Boleyn, and the younger girl had shown courage beyond her years when she was imprisoned in the Tower of London. Nevertheless, Mary died before any death warrant could be signed, and Queen Elizabeth I began her reign in 1558, declaring religious tolerance. But as the Catholic conspiracies grew ever bolder, fear for her throne made Elizabeth outlaw Catholicism, and just as in Mary's reign, many lost their lives for their beliefs. Even so, Catholic priests still travelled in secret around the country, and many of the large houses, where families stayed true to Rome, constructed priest holes where a man could be concealed if they were raided when Mass was being said. Here at Harvington Hall, there are priest holes in almost every room, and many priests were hidden here during this period of Catholic persecution. Elizabeth's greatest fear was that the Catholic Queen of Scots, her cousin Mary, who'd been crowned while still a babe in arms, would make an attempt on the English throne as another pawn in the hands of powerful conspirators. It didn't help that when she grew up, Mary was prone to making disastrous marriages, something that Elizabeth avoided altogether. Sadly though, when Mary threw herself on Elizabeth's mercy, the Catholic conspirators were still waiting in the wings, and after years spent moving the Scottish Queen from castle to castle, Elizabeth ordered Mary's execution, convinced she was guilty of treason. Elizabeth, as the Virgin Queen, ruled England for an incredible 45 years. But the downside of self-inflicted spinsterhood was the distinct lack of an heir. Ironically, the son of Mary Queen of Scots became James I, uniting England and Scotland as the first Stuart king in 1603. And still, the conspiracies over religion continued, as in 1605 the Catholic Guy Fawkes attempted to blow up the Houses of Parliament with the king inside. However, as we all celebrate burning Guy Fawkes on the bonfire every November the 5th, the gunpowder plot didn't succeed. As the century progressed, and James I was succeeded by his son Charles I, England was plunged into civil war when Oliver Cromwell and his parliamentarians challenged the divine right of kings. The upshot was that Charles was beheaded, and Cromwell made himself Lord Protector until Charles II was restored to the throne, returning in 1660 from exile in France. During Cromwell's Puritan years, there was little opportunity for scandalous behaviour. He even cancelled Christmas. But Charles II certainly put the merry back into monarch, as this is how he became known. There were scandals aplenty, which were at times controversial, but his love for his favourite mistress, the actress Nell Gwynn, only endeared him to his people. Charles's dying words were allegedly, "Let not poor Nelly starve." And as he set a precedent for very public royal affairs, the stage was set for a new era. The Stuart line came to an end in 1714, by which time the Act of Settlement had been passed, ensuring the succession remained Protestant, and as the German House of Hanover provided the nearest relations to fit the bill, George I arrived from Germany to take the throne, unable to even speak English. For many people in the newly united kingdom, this was not a popular choice, and a Jacobite rising in Scotland, fuelled by the Catholic members of the Stuart line, unhappy about their exclusion from the line of succession, served notice that more trouble was ahead. It was actually in George II's reign that the Stuart Bonnie Prince Charlie marched an army of fierce Scots south towards London. only to turn back on the advice of turncoat spies to face defeat on the bloody battlefield of Culloden. The next George, the third, was without doubt the best of the bunch, but sadly ill health has meant he's gone down in history as having been mad. However, in a programme about scandal and conspiracy, it's his eldest son George who proved to be something of an expert. As a young man, the Prince of Wales was handsome and dashing, but his father despaired of his behaviour. He ran up colossal debts, gambling and entertaining, and he regularly featured in the newspapers of the day because of his scandalous affairs with a succession of mistresses. In fact, in 1785, after failing to seduce a Catholic lady who'd taken his fancy, he actually married her, quite illegally, in order to win her over. The lady in question, Maria Fitzherbert, is perhaps the best known of George's mistresses, not least because of the property he bought in the seaside resort of Brighton to house his secret bride. Just as the Georgians flocked to the spas of Bath and Cheltenham to take the health-giving waters, they also believed sea bathing to be equally efficacious, and seaside resorts were developing at a rapid pace. George III had a fondness for Weymouth, but his son chose Brighton, as far away from his father as possible, whether at the seaside or at court in London. However, when the Prince of Wales called on the services of architect John Nash, the man responsible for many of Bath's beautiful buildings, to renovate the secret hideaway, it became anything but inconspicuous. The exotic palace, complete with onion domes and spires, took 35 years to create, and today visitors to Brighton Pavilion can still marvel at the opulence and extravagance of this spectacularly spendthrift Prince of Wales. Interestingly, architect John Nash also transformed Buckingham Palace when the Prince became King George IV in 1820. George III had bought Buckingham House with a view to creating an alternative royal residence to St James's Palace, which he described as a dust trap, but became ill before he could begin renovations. John Nash took almost 20 years to complete the project, and the amount of time he was kept busy at both Brighton Pavilion and Buckingham Palace fueled considerable gossip, as it's been suggested that George IV had a great fondness for the gentleman's wife. The only reason that George, while still Prince of Wales, was prevailed upon to marry a suitable bride was the fact that Parliament agreed to pay off his enormous debts if he did so. His marriage to Mrs. Fitzherbert 10 years earlier, as we know, was illegal, so nothing stood in the way. But when he met his new bride-to-be, Caroline of Brunswick, he evidently wished that someone would come up with just cause why they should not be lawfully joined together at the wedding ceremony. The couple hated each other on sight, and although the marriage was consummated, producing a daughter, they were unable to live together, and over the years the infidelities of both parties were sensationally reported in the press. We know that public opinion turned against the future George IV because of his treatment of his wife, and when Caroline actually wrote to the newspapers to give her version of events, the novelist Jane Austen commented upon the situation in one of her letters, saying, I suppose all the world is sitting in judgment on the Princess of Wales' letter. Poor woman. I shall support her as long as I can, because she is a woman, and because I hate her husband." Stern words indeed, and as George IV turned from a handsome youth into a grossly overweight, dissolute man as a consequence of overindulgence, his health deteriorated, and as his only legitimate daughter, Princess Charlotte, predeceased him, when he died, the throne passed to his younger, but not by much, brother. When it came to scandal, William IV had led equally as colourful a life as George IV. As Duke of Clarence, William had lived with the actress Dorothea Jordan for 22 years, and they had 10 children, all of whom were of course illegitimate. Like his older brother, his financial troubles led him to marry a suitable bride, and as Princess Charlotte, George IV's heir had died in childbirth, the race was on between the lesser royals to come up with a legitimate offspring. But well into his 50s, despite his younger bride, there was no surviving issue. When William became king in 1830, he was 64, and with the nickname Silly Billy, you can immediately work out how his public perceived him. And when he died in 1837, the British people must have wondered what manner of monarch the House of Hanover would produce next. From the madness of the much-loved George III and the much-hated reprobate George IV, right through to Silly Billy William IV, the prospect was far from promising. However, waiting in the wings was a young girl, just 18 years of age, about to turn around the reputation of this royal house. We are, of course, talking about Queen Victoria, possibly the most respectable of all British monarchs. With the restoration of moral behaviour, Victoria led by example, marrying her beloved Prince Albert in 1840 and producing a secure succession of 9 children, including 4 sons. Now you may be wondering how Queen Victoria's exemplary good name could possibly be associated with either scandal or conspiracy. But travel back in time to the autumn of 1888 and the London slums of Whitechapel, and you'll uncover an intriguing royal conspiracy that is still a source of frenzied speculation to this very day.
Extra! Extra! Whitechapel Menace strikes again! Come read all about it! Jack the Ripper, Terror of London!
When a woman's body was discovered on the 7th of August 1888 in Gunthorpe Street, that back then was known as George Yard, nobody really paid much attention. The attack on Martha Tabram had been brutal. She'd been stabbed 39 times in the throat, chest and abdomen. But this was one of the most deprived districts of the city. Murder was commonplace and an occupational hazard for prostitutes, Martha's unfortunate profession. Then, on August the 31st, in Bucks Row, now Durward Street, another woman's body was discovered. Polly Nichols was also a prostitute, and although the cause of death was most likely strangulation, her throat had been slashed from ear to ear, and her body horribly mutilated. Only when Annie Chapman's body was discovered on September the 8th in Hanbury Street did alarm bells start to ring. Annie too had been a prostitute, and with her throat cut and intestines ripped out, fears that a brutal serial killer was on the loose became widespread. The police did what they could, but progress was slow, and when a letter arrived on the 27th of September, written in blood by someone claiming to be the culprit, signed Jack the Ripper, an evil killer became a press sensation and a household name. Weeks passed, and all went relatively quiet until the night of the 30th of September, when 2 prostitutes were found murdered, quite literally, within hours of each other. The first, known as Long Liz, had had her throat cut, but the second, Catherine Eddowes, found in Mitre Square, was horribly mutilated, with body parts, including a kidney, removed. The murders were becoming more and more horrendous, and when the body of Mary Kelly was discovered on the 9th of November, her mutilated body was unrecognisable. The scene of crime images are as truly appalling to look at today as they were back in 1888, and the police search for Jack the Ripper intensified. Mary Kelly's death is officially the last of the Jack the Ripper murders, and the true identity of the killer has never been uncovered, although many theories have been put forward over the years. And this, quite incredibly, is where Queen Victoria has become a part of the Ripper legend, to such a degree that there have even been those who have suggested that Jack the Ripper was none other than the Queen herself. In all the many thousands of books written on the subject of Jack the Ripper since that fateful autumn of 1888, little credence has been given to the theory that the royal grandmother was stalking the streets of Whitechapel, killing and mutilating prostitutes. However, the conspiracy theorists have a much more believable version of events that puts Queen Victoria and members of her household under the spotlight, most significantly, the royal physician Sir William Gull. Queen Victoria's grandson, Prince Albert Victor, was destined to become the heir apparent, as the eldest male child of her firstborn son, the future Edward VII. Many in the family, including Queen Victoria and the boy's father, seem to have thought him to be retarded, but that didn't prevent him from being connected to a number of scandals, including fathering an illegitimate son and involvement in the Cleveland Street scandal, where police uncovered a male brothel. However, the most publicised story about him came to prominence in the 1960s and 70s, which connected the royal grandson to the Ripper murders. Prince Albert Victor, or so the story goes, was sent to the Whitechapel studios of artist Walter Sickert to learn how to paint. While there, he fell in love with one of Sickert's models, a common shop girl, who he married in secret and had a child with. The hypothesis was that one of the witnesses at the wedding was Mary Kelly, a friend of the bride, who upon recognising the royal bridegroom attempted to blackmail the government. As a trusted royal servant, Sir William Gull was dispatched to murder Kelly and all those she shared the information with, namely the other Ripper victims, and make it look like the work of a madman. The explanation for the night of the double murder was mistaken identity, which is why Long Liz wasn't mutilated, but the whole Ripper and the royal story is frequently put down to urban legend, and of course has provided the plot for any number of Jack the Ripper movies. Prince Albert Victor actually died quite unexpectedly just 4 years after the Ripper murders at the age of 28, with the cause of death given as flu. But this is perhaps where the real royal conspiracy lies. There are three other alternatives given for what might have happened to the unfortunate prince, the first being that he died of syphilis as a result of his dissipated lifestyle. The second option is rather more sinister, as rumours spread that he'd been given an overdose of morphine to avoid an unsuitable heir succeeding to the throne. And lastly, the most bizarre option, suggesting that the death story was a cover-up for the prince's madness, with the young man being dispatched to an asylum on the Isle of Wight, where he allegedly lived unseen until his death in the 1920s. Whatever the truth behind all these conspiracy theories, their association with Queen Victoria is absolutely fascinating, and even if nothing more than over-imaginative flights of fancy, the stories show a very dark side of Victorian London, not so far removed from the magnificent facade of Buckingham Palace. As we've now travelled at great speed through history, a pattern has emerged when a monarch is on the throne for a very long time and a Prince of Wales is kept in waiting. It was true in George IV's case, and as Queen Victoria ruled Britannia for an incredible 63 years and 7 months, her eldest son had to wait until he was 59 to take on the role he'd been preparing for all his life. After the stern morality, well, on the surface at least, of the Victorian age, the dawn of the Edwardian era, which began when the Queen died in 1901, couldn't have been more different. The new king, who greatly enjoyed his country estate at Sandringham, was nevertheless at the heart of every grand, glittering society occasion, and just had been the case when he was Prince of Wales. Wherever Edward VII was to be found, scandal was never too far away. In the early days, to try and curb the wild behaviour of the Prince of Wales, Queen Victoria decided he should be married as quickly as possible to a suitable princess, and Alexandra of Denmark was selected. Fortunately for the prince, Alexandra was beautiful and affectionate, but unable to control her young husband's wild ways, especially with the ladies, and she tolerated his affairs. When asked in later years about this, she always replied that he loved her best, and the truth is, he probably did. Even so, throughout his entire married life, Edward VII kept numerous mistresses. Actresses like Lily Langtry and Sarah Bernhardt, along with various socialites, including the famous American beauty Jenny Jerome, later Lady Randolph Churchill, and mother of Britain's World War II Prime Minister Winston, were great favourites. In fact, his last mistress, Alice Keppel, was even admitted by Queen Alexandra to Buckingham Palace to be at the King's deathbed in 1910. Now, as we already know, King Edward's eldest son, Prince Albert Victor, died at the age of 28, shortly after the Ripper murders, and the throne passed to Edward's second son, who became King George V. The people of Britain felt a great sense of loss at the old king's passing, despite all the scandals, and as the new king enjoyed a contented married life with Queen Mary, the princess who'd been his older brother's fiancée at the time of his death, the years between 1910 and 1936 were characterised by dignified royal stability. But with World War II looming large when George V died, the Prince of Wales in waiting had an even greater bombshell to drop on the people of Britain. Like other monarchs before him, George V was well aware of his eldest son's shortcomings, and even warned Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin that after becoming king, the boy would ruin himself in 12 months. This was a prophecy that proved to be truer than he could possibly have known. Edward VIII became king on the 20th of January 1936, and a scandal even bigger than the affairs of Edward VII rocked the nation. The king announced his intention to marry his American mistress, the already twice married divorcee Wallis Simpson, provoking a constitutional crisis that was only resolved by Edward's abdication on the 11th of December. Just as his father had predicted, Edward VIII had lasted as king slightly less than 12 months. But as his brother stepped forward to become King George VI, at least the monarchy, although seriously shaken by the abdication, was able to survive. Through the hard years of World War II, George VI and his family stood shoulder to shoulder with their fellow Londoners as Hitler's Luftwaffe blitzed the city with nightly bombing raids. Then, when the war was over, the royal family celebrated with their people as a new age of hope dawned. George VI and his wife, Queen Elizabeth, had restored the nation's faith in the monarchy, and when the king died as a result of ill health in 1952, his eldest daughter, as Elizabeth II, came to the throne equipped with a sense of duty and willingness to serve beyond her 25 years. And so we come right up to date. But in the final years of the 20th century, with millennium celebrations on the horizon, a royal tragedy occurred that once again threw the monarchy into disarray, resulting in conspiracy theories threatening far-reaching consequences for the constitutional monarchy. When Queen Elizabeth attended the wedding of her eldest son, Prince Charles, to Lady Diana Spencer at St. Paul's Cathedral in 1981, it must have been with a degree of relief that the succession was going to be safe. Like so many princes of Wales to have gone before him, Charles had been involved with a number of young ladies, some of whom had been a great deal more suitable than others. At the age of 33, it seemed Charles had at last found his very own fairy tale princess to be a mother to his children and eventually become his queen. But sadly, this is one fairy tale without a happy ending, and by the 1990s, the delightful family snapshots of the Waleses with their two sons, Princes William and Harry, were nothing more than a facade. The very public separation and then divorce of the Prince and Princess of Wales in 1996 meant that the couple's private affairs were splashed right across the media, and the people of Britain's adoration of Diana, Princess of Wales, resulted in a significant downturn in the popularity of the royal family firm. News that the Prince of Wales had conducted a long-term affair with Mrs. Camilla Parker Bowles turned public opinion further against him, and Diana continued to be the most popular royal, even though her HRH status had been taken from her. Ironically, the situation was far more complex, and there were faults on both sides. But for the die-hard conspiracists, the fact that Camilla also happens to be the great-granddaughter of Alice Keppel, the royal mistress allowed to be at the deathbed of Edward VII, history has indeed repeated itself. Whatever the wrongs or right of the much-publicised breakup of Diana and Charles, when news came through that Diana had been killed as the result of a car crash in a Paris tunnel in the early hours of the 31st of August 1997, the nation was first plunged into a state of shock and then into a state of grief and mourning. Although the findings suggest this was a tragic accident, how or why the princess came to be killed so unexpectedly has continued to be subject of both intense investigation and even greater speculation, with conspiracy theories around every corner you turn. But as Diana, Princess of Wales, rests in peace on an island at Althorpe, her ancestral home, who can say what the future will reveal about this ongoing royal saga, and for that matter, any of the other scandals and conspiracies featured in this programme. Like the memory of Diana, Princess of Wales, a good story never dies. Down through the ages, it only improves with keeping and, of course, retelling.
In fairy tales, dreams do come true. Little girls can grow up to marry handsome princes and live happily ever after in beautiful palaces, where they have delightful children of their own and in time become queen, to rule with wisdom and grace. But in real life, even when it appears a fairy tale is being played out in the full glare of our modern media age, things never seem to go quite to plan. There are few places in the world today where you still find princes and princesses, or for that matter, kings and queens, but the thousands of visitors who travel to London each year come face to face with royal palaces and a history of succession that dates right back to the Dark Ages. However, in the late summer of 1997, people from all over the world gathered in London in a state of utter shock and disbelief as the most publicised fairy tale of the 20th century came to an abrupt and tragic end. In the early hours of Sunday, the 31st of August, a shocking news story began to unfold, with the world's press agencies on red alert. Shortly after midnight, Diana, Princess of Wales, left the Ritz Hotel in Paris and got into a waiting Mercedes with her companion Dodi Al-Fayed. Speeding off into the night to escape waiting reporters, the car crashed at high speed in the Place de l'Arme road tunnel. The driver and Dodi died instantly, but the emergency services arrived to find Diana alive, although seriously injured. At the nearby Piti-Salpêtrière hospital, a team of doctors did all they could, but to no avail, and the princess, who should, if fairy tales are to be believed, have lived happily ever after, died at the tragically young age of 36 at 4 a.m. Paris time.
The world is shocked to discover this morning that Diana, Princess of Wales...
As the people of Britain awoke to hear the terrible news in the early morning bulletins, the sense of loss was palpable across the nation, and within hours floral tributes began to appear at the gates of Kensington Palace. creating a carpet of colour, the like of which had never been seen before. The one question upon everyone's lips was quite simply, how could this have happened? Despite the fact that Diana had been divorced from the Prince of Wales for the past year and had relinquished her HRH status, she was still officially a member of the royal family as the mother of the second and third in line to the throne. For the great British public, Diana was as much England's Rose as she had ever been, and with her increased charity work, remained one of the most popular of all the royals. Almost instantly the conspiracy theories began to take flight, and PR for the House of Windsor hit an all-time low, when the beautiful woman, tipped to lead the royal family into the 21st century, was instead laid to rest in the grounds of her ancestral home, Althorpe, in Northamptonshire. Diana's death without doubt marked the closing of an extraordinary chapter in the history of the royal family. But as the years have passed, rather than fading, her memory has lived on to inspire each new generation. Yet to this day, there are still many questions surrounding the death of Diana, Princess of Wales, and chances are no one will ever know for sure the exact chain of events that led to the moment when Diana's life came to such an untimely end. Even so, nothing can detract from the impact Diana had on those who knew her personally, and the rest of us who watched her progress from afar. And as we remember the princess who meant such a great deal to so many, we'll follow Diana from her birth on the royal estate at Sandringham in Norfolk to catch a glimpse of the real-life daughter, wife, mother and princess upon whom fate bestowed the fame and fortune mere mortals can only dream of, while dealing her the cruelest of blows. When Noel Coward observed, "Very flat, Norfolk," there's no disputing the fact, but to dismiss this ancient county as a result would be to do it a great injustice. With a stunningly beautiful coastline, quaint market towns, richly verdant agricultural land and the navigable rivers and lakes known as the Broads, this is rural England at its loveliest, and it is the landscape of Princess Diana's birth and childhood. Sandringham, where Diana was born, is a popular royal retreat, and as her father, who was destined to become Earl Spencer, was equerry first to King George VI and then to Diana's future mother-in-law, the Queen, the Spencer family lived at Park House on the magnificent Sandringham estate. Queen Victoria purchased Sandringham Hall, as it was then known, for her oldest son Bertie, the Prince of Wales, and future King Edward VII, for his new bride Princess Alexandra. When the renovations were complete in 1870, the house was way ahead of its time, with gas lighting, flushing toilets, and even a very early shower. Today, Sandringham has been the private home of 4 generations of sovereigns, with the Queen generally in residence over the Christmas holiday until the middle of February. The delightful church of St Mary Magdalene, where Diana was christened, is the focus of much attention on Christmas morning, as it's where the royal family worship, bringing out quite a crowd to witness the festive occasion. So, when the Honourable Diana Frances Spencer was born at Park House, Sandringham, on the 1st of July 1961, the 4th child of Viscount and Viscountess Althorpe, she could not have had a better placed arrival for a future princess. With 2 older sisters, Sarah, born in 1955, and Jane, born in 1957, when Diana appeared on the scene, the Althorpes would have still been hankering after a son, an heir, especially as in 1960 their 3rd child, a boy, John, died within hours of his birth. The present Earl Spencer, Charles, Diana's younger brother, was born in 1964 to finally complete the next generation of this aristocratic family. For onlookers, it would appear that Diana was the most fortunate of children, just as she would be perceived as extremely privileged for the entire duration of her tragically short life. But things were never as rosy as they seemed. Despite enjoying the delights of 200,000 acres of beautiful Norfolk countryside, which on occasion meant going to tea with the royal neighbours at the big house, life for the young Spencers was about to be thrown into turmoil. Diana's father was content living as a gentleman farmer and being part of the community, even playing for the local cricket team. But 14 years his junior, her mother, after giving birth to 5 children before she was 30, longed for the excitement and glamour of London society. Diana was just 6 when her parents separated, after the Viscountess fell in love with Peter Shan Kidd and left her husband. The acrimonious divorce that followed resulted in custody being granted to the Viscount, and consequently Diana had little contact with her mother. Although close to her father, whom she undoubtedly adored, the day-to-day care of the children fell to a succession of nannies, which was far from ideal for the sensitive Diana, who quickly had to learn the art of self-reliance. The older Spencer girls did well at school, but Diana was far more autistic than academic, and she struggled to keep up with the high standards set by Sarah and Jane. Diana's confidence was further dented when she broke her arm in a riding accident, and unlike many of her far from academic peers, she wasn't even to find solace in ponies and horses. After attending Silfield School in nearby King's Lynn as a day pupil, Diana followed her sisters to boarding school at the age of 9. A shy girl, Diana was most remembered for her kindness to her fellow pupils, especially those younger than herself, as she grew into her teens. But the Spencer girls faced quite a shock when they returned to Park House for the holidays. In the early 1970s, their father brought the new woman in his life to meet his children, Rain, Countess of Dartmouth, the daughter of romantic novelist Barbara Cartland. If Johnny Spencer had hoped to create a happy new family, he was sadly disappointed, as to say that his children didn't take to Rain as a prospective stepmother would be a colossal understatement. This bombshell for the Spencer children was then followed by yet another dramatic change in 1975, when the 7th Earl Spencer, Diana's grandfather, died at the age of 83. Johnny became the 8th Earl Spencer. Charles, his son, was now Viscount Althorpe, and Diana, like her sisters, exchanged her honourable title for that of a lady. The family moved from Sandringham to the ancestral home at Althorpe, complete with 8,500 acres in Northamptonshire. For the painfully shy Diana, away at boarding school for most of the time, it meant she knew no one in the vicinity, and matters got worse a year later when her father married Rain in July 1976. Like many great ancestral estates in the 1970s, Althorpe was in need of total renovation, and the Spencer children believed that Rain was dominating the proceedings, selling off many of the family treasures to fund the refurbishments, which caused considerable resentment. These were crucial years for Diana to be suffering such upheaval, and her schoolwork undoubtedly suffered as a result. When she failed to gain academic qualifications, and a finishing school in Switzerland simply left her homesick and unhappy, she headed for London in search of work. There were plenty of well-to-do young families in London in search of suitable nannies for their children, and as caring for little ones made Diana happy, which in turn meant she was very good at it, she soon carved out a new existence for herself, although hardly more than a child herself. In 1978, on the advice of her mother, Diana bought a 3-bedroomed apartment in Coleherne Court, Fulham, and promptly invited a select group of girls who were old friends to house share. These were blissfully happy days for Diana, and although still painfully shy, she started to meet people her own age and enjoy the young, affluent London scene. After a while, she went to work at the Young England kindergarten in Pimlico, which she described as her first proper job, and again Diana excelled, with her young charges adoring her. At last, the girl who had craved nothing more in her life than approval and affection had found fulfilment, looking after other people's children. The late 1970s and early 1980s were exciting times for this new generation of the aristocracy. Benefiting from family money to back them and a London base for Monday to Friday with a place in the country for weekends, the Henrys and Henriettas of the landed gentry made the Knightsbridge, South Kensington and Chelsea districts of London their own. Here, amongst their own kind, with the system of debutantes out to do the season now defunct, it was possible for these young people to meet suitable marriage partners. And although times were beginning to change, the main goal of an aristocratic girl was still to marry well and produce the next generation of Henrys and Henriettas. This part of London, which incorporated Sloane Street and Sloane Square, resulted in this affluent group being dubbed Sloane Rangers. And to this day, a visit to Knightsbridge or South Kensington will bring you into contact with 21st century Sloane Rangers, keeping up the tradition. That Diana and her flatmates were Sloanes is without question. However, the future Princess of Wales soon developed a style all her own. With a tall, willowy grace, the fair complexion of a classic English rose, and an endearingly naive and innocent charm, even while still in her teens, this was one lady in waiting who was poised to stand out from the crowd. When Diana was born, her future husband was just a matter of months away from becoming a teenager, and as we've already established, the pair were destined to move in the same circles. However, if Diana's privileged childhood is considered to have been rather lonely and isolated, the early life of Prince Charles can only be sympathetically regarded in the same light. On the 14th of November 1948, a baby boy was born at Buckingham Palace to the then Princess Elizabeth, Duchess of Edinburgh, and her husband Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. Christened Charles, Philip, Arthur George, the prince was their first child, and had the succession run unhindered after the death of King George V in 1936, the solemn prospect of becoming a king may never have fallen upon the child's shoulders. By right, the first son of King George V, Edward VIII, should have remained on the British throne until his death in 1972, but his determination to marry the divorcee Wallis Simpson, the woman he loved, resulted in his abdication on the 10th of December 1936, after not quite 12 months as the reigning monarch. As a consequence, the next in line, George V's second son, the Duke of York, stepped unexpectedly into the limelight to become King George VI. With Queen Elizabeth, his wife, and two young daughters at his side, despite his shyness and a nervous stammer, George VI became a much-loved and respected sovereign. In a difficult age, as Britain faced the horrors of World War II, the King shared the experience of his people as London burned, and even worked with determination to overcome his stammer in order to boost public morale. On the balcony of Buckingham Palace, he celebrated VE Day with all of London in 1945, and in the post-war era continued to restore the reputation of the monarchy after the constitutional crisis brought about by his brother's abdication. That George VI rose to the challenges that fate had thrust upon him is without question, but it wasn't only his personal circumstances that changed. Elizabeth, his eldest daughter, also faced the same constitutional duties asked of her father, but as the heiress presumptive was given more time than George VI to prepare for the royal role of sovereign. On her 21st birthday, she declared that her whole life would be devoted to the service of her people, and it was a promise that the young princess took very seriously indeed. When Princess Elizabeth married Prince Philip, a member of the Greek royal family and a second cousin once removed, it was exactly as protocol would have dictated, although it's been suggested that the princess fell in love with her handsome prince while still a girl in her teens. After the arrival of Charles in 1948, Princess Anne was born in 1950, and despite the expectation that Charles would one day become king, it was still a long way off. Nevertheless, when his grandfather's health began to falter in 1951, his mother's succession to the throne was becoming more imminent than anyone realised. George VI died at Sandringham House on the 6th of February 1952 at the age of 56, and a few months shy of her 26th birthday, the new Queen, Elizabeth II, was called upon to do her constitutional duty at a time of great personal loss, still grieving for her father. So it was that His Royal Highness Prince Charles, aged just 3, became Duke of Cornwall, Duke of Rothesay, Earl of Carrick and Baron Renfrew, Lord of the Isles, Prince and Great Steward of Scotland, and if that wasn't enough for a toddler to cope with, he also became the heir apparent. Now, should you be wondering what the difference is between an heir apparent and an heir presumptive, it's actually quite simple. Prince Charles as heir apparent cannot be removed from his position as first in line to the throne. Technically, when George VI became king, if he had gone on to produce a male heir, his eldest daughter, now Queen Elizabeth II, as heiress presumptive, would have had to have given precedence to a younger sibling because he was a boy. With his mother now occupied with matters of state, and his father often away for significant periods of time because of his naval duties, just had been the case for Diana, the day-to-day care of Charles fell to nannies and other members of the royal family, most notably his beloved grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. His circumstances were very different to Diana's, but the need for parental attention, approval and affection would have been just the same, no matter how grand the palaces were that he happened to be living in. It's been said on numerous occasions throughout history that with great wealth and power comes great responsibility. The ancient tradition of noblesse oblige, and for Charles, service, duty and the path to kingship probably dominated his childhood, and for that matter, his entire adult life. Charles was created Prince of Wales in 1958. in keeping with the historic precedent of the reigning monarch bestowing the title upon the heir apparent, since Edward I did, way back in 1301. Ironically, through the pages of the history books, the title of Prince of Wales does not guarantee accession to the throne, and since the first investiture of Edward II, 7 have so far failed to go on to become king. Also, the high-profile role of the Princess of Wales, the wife of Prince, has been graced by a number of fascinating women, not least Diana, Princess of Wales, the most famous of them all. Breaking with the tradition of future monarchs being educated in isolation by tutors, Prince Charles was sent to school from the age of 8, firstly in London, then Kent and Scotland. Equally as sensitive as Diana was, Charles is reported to have found boarding at Gordonston School in Scotland difficult, miles from home in austere surroundings where his father, the Duke of Edinburgh, had thrived. Charles completed his education at Gordonston, including 2 terms at Geelong Grammar School in Australia, leaving with good qualifications including A-levels in history and French. Rather than going straight into the military, as was traditional for the heir apparent, Charles went to Trinity College, Cambridge, as an undergraduate, reading anthropology, archaeology and history. When he graduated with a BA in 1970, he actually made history, as the first member of the royal family to earn a degree. Now considered the most eligible young man in Britain, if not perhaps the whole world, public and therefore press interest was already fueling speculation about a suitable match for the prince. In 1969, Charles's investiture as Prince of Wales was held at Carnarvon Castle, another historic first, as the ceremony was actually held in Wales, and as the event was televised, millions tuned in to watch the Queen bestow this honour on her eldest son. It was in the same year that the Queen took the decision to allow the BBC to film a documentary about the personal lives of herself and the royal family, including her 2 younger sons, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward, born in 1960 and 1964. The programme proved very popular with the public and was a dignified response to the growing media demands faced by the monarchy. Nevertheless, it heralded a new and dangerous era that would culminate in the tragic death of Diana, Princess of Wales, before the end of the century. When Prince Charles embarked upon a naval career in 1971, complete with dashing uniform, press interest in any girl he so much developed a friendship with escalated. As a future king, he would be expected to produce heirs of his own, and the hunt was on for a suitable bride for the sailor prince. On paper, finding such a lady was quite a tall order, especially at a time when young women, whether high-born or commoners, were enjoying greater independence and sexual freedom than ever before. It was required that a prospective Princess of Wales and future Queen should be Protestant, not a divorcee, meet the approval of her future mother-in-law Elizabeth II, and ideally be a virgin, with aristocratic connections and no colourful past for the press to delve into. Many of the young ladies with whom Charles had been linked failed to meet these exacting requirements, but interestingly, when he dated Lady Sarah Spencer, Diana's older sister, in the late 1970s, a royal wedding looked to be on the cards. However, despite Lady Sarah's eminent suitability, a marriage proposal was not forthcoming, and the couple parted company. But not before Charles had come into contact with the incredibly shy but blossoming Lady Diana Spencer. History, as they say, was in the making. Ever since the swinging 60s, London had become an exciting, vibrant and fashionable place to be, and as the equally colourful 70s drew to a close, it appeared that Prince Charles was settling rather comfortably into bachelordom. Then a tragedy occurred that quite literally turned his world upside down. When the Provisional IRA murdered Earl Mountbatten of Burma in a bomb blast whilst he was out sailing in Donegal Bay on the 27th of August 1979, they committed a terrorist atrocity that not only shocked the world, but also robbed Prince Charles of a much-loved great-uncle, who happened to be, in all probability, the single most significant male in his life. It's been said that the pair referred to each other as honorary grandfather and honorary grandson, and the younger man always listened to what his worldly wise relation had to say. Great-uncle Louis had without doubt lived life to the full, with a glamorous circle of acquaintance, including royalty and the new generation of celebrities from the Hollywood film industry, counting such luminaries as Charlie Chaplin, Douglas Fairbanks, and Mary Pickford amongst his closest friends. Having watched the previous Prince of Wales, Edward VIII, abdicate over a woman, while being no stranger to the gossip columnist himself over the years, he is reputed to have advised Prince Charles to enjoy the bachelor life while he could, and then marry a young, pure, inexperienced girl to ensure the succession. As Prince Charles grieved for Mountbatten, he turned to an old friend, Camilla Parker Bowles, for support, facing also the recognition of his own mortality. Naturally, he wanted to honour the Earl's memory, and it appears he was now ready to settle down and find a Princess of Wales to stand beside him, as he prepared to face up to the responsibilities of being heir apparent. With the benefit of hindsight, if he could have married Camilla at that time, then the tragedy of Diana's death could have been averted. But she was already married, and as we already know, even if she had divorced her husband, the threat to the constitutional monarchy, such a relatively short time after the abdication of Edward VIII, would have been disastrous. In such an impossible situation, Camilla, as the prince's friend, joined the search for a suitable bride. As the 70s gave way to the 80s, all eyes turned towards London, and more specifically Coleherne Court, home to a group of girls about town, one of whom was, of course, Lady Diana Spencer. At 19, Diana, who had watched the prince from fairly close quarters at Sandringham, was not surprisingly swept off her feet by the attentions of a sophisticated, charming older man. Diana was invited to join the circle of acquaintance she had always been on the edge of, including parties on HMS Britannia, the royal yacht, during Cowes Week on the Isle of Wight. Today, this beautiful craft is no longer in service and can be found at Leith, the port of Edinburgh, where it is a very popular attraction. However, even at a distance so many years later, it's easy to see how a tender-hearted young woman with little life experience, looking for romance, would have fallen in love with the prince who opened up such an exciting and glamorous new world to her. Back in London, a relationship between Charles and Diana flourished, with romantic candlelit dinners at Buckingham Palace, supposedly in secret. But it wasn't long before the world's press set up camp outside Coleherne Court and the Young England kindergarten where Diana worked. Lady Diana Spencer was demure and charming despite the harassment, proving herself suitably discreet. And with this test passed, she was whisked off to see how she would cope in Scotland, watching the prince and his friends fishing and shooting, as all the while Diana continued to stake her claim to the title Princess of Wales. Diana was also introduced to the county of Gloucestershire, often dubbed the Royal County because of the number of royals with country residences there. Charles took Diana to visit Highgrove, the country house he bought early in 1980, close to the delightful market town of Tetbury. It was during one of the Gloucestershire weekends that Charles took Diana to meet Camilla, and with his friend's approval broached the subject of marriage. The official engagement between Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer was announced by Buckingham Palace on the 24th of February 1981. In the photographs to mark the occasion, the bride-to-be wore a blue outfit from Harrods, and it was evident for all to see that she adored her fiancé. It was no longer practical for the future Princess of Wales to flat share in Fulham, and immediately after the engagement was announced, she moved into Clarence House, the home of the Prince's grandmother, the Queen Mother. In the months leading up to the royal wedding in July, Lady Di fever swept the land. As she asked for advice from Vogue, where her sister Jane worked, Diana developed a style that was extremely feminine, with pie frill collars, pussycat bows and long floral skirts, which the high street fashion stores were quick to emulate. Hairdressers up and down the land were asked to reproduce Diana's long, blonde, flicked fringe, and the demand for nannies who were aristocratic young English girls skyrocketed. Although royal weddings usually favoured Westminster Abbey, St Paul's Cathedral was the chosen venue, accommodating the unprecedented 3,500 guests. It was a fairy tale ending to a modern-day love story, and when the newlyweds set off for Broadlands, Hampshire, the home of Earl Mountbatten, for the first night of their honeymoon, before taking a Mediterranean cruise aboard the royal yacht Britannia, the whole world wished them well and expected them to live happily ever after. And for a while, the Prince and Princess of Wales looked to have found the love and security they both so desperately needed with each other. If the public at large needed further confirmation, an announcement from Buckingham Palace revealing that the princess was pregnant 3 months after returning from honeymoon ensured that the next generation of royals became more popular than ever. When Diana gave birth to a baby boy here at St Mary's Hospital, London, on the 21st of June 1982, no one could have asked more of her, and her son, styled His Royal Highness Prince William of Wales, immediately took his place as second in line to the throne. A further visit to St Mary's for the birth of His Royal Highness Prince Henry of Wales, better known to the world as Harry, on the 15th of September 1984 made the future of the constitutional monarchy even more secure. It's been suggested that Prince Charles had hoped for a daughter, But a healthy son, third in line to the throne, was again all anyone could have reasonably asked of the Princess of Wales. That Diana, Princess of Wales, adored her two sons is beyond question. But as she fulfilled her royal duties, whether based at her London home, Kensington Palace, or Highgrove in Gloucestershire, the strain was beginning to show. By the mid-80s, there was already speculation that all was not well behind these fine gates, between the prince and his fairy tale princess, not helped by the glamorous sense of style Diana developed as she grew into one of the world's most beautiful women. Wherever the Prince and Princess of Wales went, at home or abroad, the crowds who flocked to see them were invariably more interested in what the princess was wearing rather than what the more serious-minded prince had to say. However, Diana paid a high price for her status as a fashion icon, suffering from an eating disorder that was most probably bulimia nervosa. In just a few short years, the beautiful English Rose, who had promised to breathe new life into the royal family, had been stifled by duty and protocol, and Charles, who had always tried to follow the motto of every Prince of Wales, Ich dien, meaning I serve, found himself right back where he had started, before Diana had agreed to marry him. What happened next is well documented through newspaper and television archives, as Charles once more turned to Camilla Parker Bowles for comfort, and Diana searched for solace in what she thought to be a discreet affair. As head of the royal family, the Queen faced a constitutional crisis every bit as explosive as the abdication of Edward VIII, which resulted in her father becoming king back in the 1930s. Matters deteriorated further, and by 1992, after the breakdown of her daughter Princess Anne's marriage and the separation of her second son, Prince Andrew, from his wife Sarah, Duchess of York, the Queen described this as an annus horribilis, which translates from the Latin as quite simply a horrible year. Added to so much family turmoil, Windsor Castle, the place the Queen regards as her true home, was damaged by fire, and before the year was out, the Prince and Princess of Wales had also separated. As the world's press looked on, Diana continued to live at Kensington Palace, enjoying time there with her boys. Charles spent a lot of time at Highgrove in Gloucestershire, where the young princes had plenty of opportunity to make the most of the beautiful countryside while they were with their father. Just as is the case for all families that face a marital split, these were difficult times, and for the Prince and Princess of Wales, struggling to find resolution for the sake of the children, the constant press attention did nothing to make things any easier. However, despite her troubled personal circumstances, Diana continued to work tirelessly for charity, campaigning to improve public perception of AIDS sufferers and highlight the terrible destruction caused by landmines, as she fought for a worldwide ban on these cruelly devastating weapons of war. Ironically, this undoubtedly worthy, high-profile stance of the princess caused the royal family some difficulty, especially when Diana hit the headlines as she attempted to carve out a new life for herself. It was now extremely unlikely that Diana could still become queen, but it wasn't conclusively resolved, and the public adoration that she generated continued undiminished. And Prince Charles, as the nation's future king, was forever going to find himself overshadowed by Diana. Eventually, the couple's divorce was finalised in 1996, a year and 3 days before Diana's death on the streets of Paris. And so we return to where we began this remembrance of Diana, with the whole world in shock at the loss of this truly remarkable young woman. On a fine September morning, London, basking in early autumn sunlight, prepared to bid Diana a final farewell. Her funeral was held at Westminster Abbey at 11 a.m. on Saturday the 6th of September 1997. The royal family were all in attendance, alongside the Spencers, led by Diana's younger brother Charles, now the Earl. As was only right and proper, the main focus was to support Diana's 2 sons, William and Harry. So despite conspiracy theories abounding and an element of antagonism levelled at both the press and the royal family, the funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales, was as dignified as it was moving. After the service, watched by millions around the world, Diana's mortal remains were carried on an incredible journey home to Althorpe in Northamptonshire. All the way from London's familiar landmarks northwards, the funeral cortege was greeted by literally thousands of ordinary folk waiting to pay their last respects to the people's princess. Even along the verges of the M1 motorway, entire families joined together to say their fond farewells, and by the time Diana eventually reached the gates of Althorpe for the last time, the cortege was more than an hour late. Understandably, Diana's family wanted to bury her where she could no longer be subject to press intrusion, and her grave couldn't be more private, on an island in the middle of the oval lake in the grounds of Althorpe. In the years since, those closest to Diana have been able to visit her grave in absolute privacy, which, as her sons faced the full glare of publicity that dominated Diana's adult life, no doubt they have very much appreciated this. Nevertheless, it has been difficult for the millions of people who would have also liked to commemorate the anniversaries of Diana's life and death, with nowhere specific to gather. The gates at Kensington Palace, where so many floral tributes appeared way back in 1997, will often be where people choose to place flowers. But a memorial in one of the great churches like Westminster Abbey, where her funeral took place, or St Paul's Cathedral, where she married, would certainly prove popular with visitors who wish to remember Diana with thoughtful contemplation. And as her memory lives on, who can say what the future might bring? However, for many people, a tour around the country to quietly walk in the footsteps of this unforgettable princess will always be a very special and rewarding experience. From the magnificent Sandringham estate in Norfolk to the beautiful Althorpe House in Northamptonshire, these great stately homes, so much a part of the nation's heritage, have times when they are open to the public. Also, a visit to Gloucestershire will prove very interesting. Despite Highgrove, the home of Prince Charles, not being open to the public, the delightful neighbouring market town of Tetbury is fascinating, especially when you count up the number of "by royal appointment" signs over the shops. And of course, those of us with an interest in Diana enjoy following the progress of her two sons, Prince William and Prince Harry. So what could be nicer than savouring a pint of finest English ale where the princes have been known to partake of the hospitality when they're staying at Highgrove? Everywhere Diana went, she touched the lives of those she came into contact with, bringing joy and hope to where it was most needed. But if you really want to experience the true spirit of this elusive butterfly, then London is the place to go. Beginning with Buckingham Palace, you can walk down the Mall following the route Diana took to St Paul's Cathedral on that eventful July morning, leaving the palace as Lady Diana Spencer to return as the Princess of Wales and future Queen. As a point of interest, the Spencer family name is attached to the magnificent Spencer House, which offers guided tours on the Sundays it's open to the public. When the first Earl Spencer was a prominent society figure back in the 18th century, this neoclassical treasure put him at the heart of London, literally just across Green Park from Buckingham Palace. Although hundreds of years later, Lady Diana Spencer lived in a modern flat very different to the grand facade you see before you, Spencer House is nonetheless a timely reminder of Diana's impeccable ancestry in her own right. By contrast, a trip to Coleham Court will always raise a smile, remembering the vibrancy of Diana as a blossoming bride-to-be courted by her fairy tale prince. And naturally, a visit to Harrods is an absolute must. Here you will find the stylish designers that Diana adored as a girl about town, but much, much more. There is a permanent memorial to Diana, Princess of Wales, and Dodi Al Fayed, put in place by the historic store's owner, Mohammed Al Fayed, the father of Diana's companion who died with her on that fateful night in Paris. The official Princess of Wales Memorial Fountain in Hyde Park was opened by the Queen in 2004 to symbolise Diana's great affinity and openness with people from all walks of life. However, the fountain has not been without its critics, and many feel a memorial close to Diana's Kensington Palace home far more appropriate. Kensington Gardens have always been associated with Peter Pan, as it's where the author J.M. Barrie met the little boys who inspired him to write his masterpiece. Here, the Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Playground recreates the world of Peter Pan and is a fitting tribute to a princess who had such a special way with children. As our programme draws to a close, this is perhaps the perfect place to remember Diana, Princess of Wales. For an all too short period of history, she lit up the world and shone so bright that her legacy, as you've seen for yourself, lives on. And perhaps the most precious gift bequeathed by Diana to the nation are her sons, Prince William and Prince Harry. Diana's determination to help them lead happy, fulfilled lives, knowing that their parents loved them, is a lasting testament to an English rose that will blossom eternally. Yet the story of Diana, Princess of Wales, only goes to show that there's no predicting what the future might hold for any of us. And although we will always feel sadness for a life lost so tragically young, Diana will forever be remembered where it matters most, in the hearts of those for whom she would have been proud to be Queen.
Anybody who visits London at the height of the summer will soon realise that the United Kingdom's capital city attracts sightseers from every far-flung corner of the globe. And what's on their list of attractions to see? 9 times out of 10, it'll be Buckingham Palace. Often followed by the Tower of London. And since the tragic death of Diana, Princess of Wales in 1997, her former residence, Kensington Palace. In an age when the monarchy, British or otherwise, is accused of being an outdated institution, the tourists still flock in their millions to follow in the footsteps of royalty, both ancient and modern, to see for themselves the places where history was made. When it comes to listing the great kings and queens of the past, there are undoubtedly some that are better remembered than others. Richard the Lionheart, Henry VIII, and King George III are renowned for very different reasons, and when it comes to the ladies, Mary I, both of them one of England and one of Scotland, Elizabeth I, and Queen Victoria are as fascinating today as when they were alive. But there are many more characters worthy of investigation that are far less well known. So whether you want a basic who's who of the British monarchy to help you in the next pub quiz, or you'd like to find out how we got from feuding tribes of ancient Britons to the present day, prepare for a right royal romp through the history books, so that you never need to get your Henrys, Georges, Edwards, Richards, Marys and Williams mixed up again. Now, before we get down to the nitty-gritty of succession, it's well worth stepping back further in time to take a closer look at the British Isles just after the birth of Christ, when the Romans were masters of all they surveyed, including a large part of the United Kingdom. Of the native Brits, many of whom were Celts, there was considerable opposition to the Roman occupation, not least from the woman, often dubbed the Queen of the Ancient Britons, Boudica, or if you happen to be of a certain age, Boadicea. This fearsome warrior queen led her Iceni tribe to revolt against the Romans, and as neighbouring tribes of ancient Britons swelled their numbers, Boudica led a campaign that advanced from Colchester all the way to London and beyond, until the Romans finally managed to stop her in her tracks. Without actual records, it's hard to be precise about dates, but it's believed Boudica came to prominence in about AD 61. But even after her death, the Romans continued to have problems with the Celts. Rather than face the Scots in the north, who were as fearsome as the great warrior queen, in AD 122, the Roman Emperor Hadrian actually built a wall to keep the Scots out of England. This early separation of the neighbouring nations would continue for centuries, but more on that subject later. Eventually, the Roman occupation came to an end when the overstretched empire recalled their soldiers back to Rome. But waiting in the wings were the bloodthirsty Saxons, ready with invasion plans of their own. However, if legend is to be believed, one man united the tribes of the British Isles to resist the Saxon advances, and it's quite possible that he came from Wales. We've all heard of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table fighting for chivalry and honour in a lawless age. But try and find him in an historic timeline and you really will struggle. A true Celt, Arthur is thought to have lived in the 5th century AD, and this immediately gives us a major problem historically. Our images of King Arthur and his gallant knights belong to a much later age, but there's a very good reason for this. Way back in the 12th century, a bishop known as Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote a history of the kings of Britain, and where the facts were a little sketchy, he simply filled in the blanks. Consequently, Geoffrey's rendition of the King Arthur story was set in the time that he knew best, his own, and we've had knights in shining armour and damsels in distress ever since. Fascinating as this may or may not be, it just goes to prove that we need to view history books with care, and especially when it comes to royalty, because what may appear as fact might well indeed be fiction. Therefore, with images of King Arthur's mortal remains sailing away with the Lady of the Lake, and his sword Excalibur disappearing beneath the waters of Dosemary Pool, we'll move on to a time when history is far more reliably documented. After the demise of Arthur, the Saxon occupiers in waiting invaded, and by 613 had driven the Celts out of England. 7 kingdoms were then established: Kent, Sussex, Essex, East Anglia, Wessex, Mercia and Northumbria, with each having its own king. Eventually, one of the kings, Egbert of Wessex, took control of all 7 kingdoms, after much fighting, to be the first King of England in 829, with his son and grandsons succeeding him. In fact, one of the earliest kings most of us will have heard of was Alfred the Great, and he was a grandson of Egbert, but in popular culture is much better remembered for being a very bad cook. Alfred became King of England in 1871, and by all accounts was a well-educated man, who, as a child, had been taken to visit the Pope in Rome, not an inconsiderable achievement in the 9th century. However, England was once more under threat of invasion, this time by the Danes, and this is how the story of the burnt cakes came about. Alfred escaped an attack by the Danes in the West Country, and legend has it that he sought refuge with peasants living on the Somerset levels, while he contemplated how to save his kingdom. One day, when the peasant's wife went out on errands, Alfred was left in charge of her baking. But he was so caught up with matters of state, he forgot all about the cooking, and was duly chastised when the woman returned to burnt cakes. Whether true or not, this is the story that has gone down in the history books, when Alfred was in fact, as his name suggests, a much greater king than this footnote gives him credit for. After Alfred, and a succession of Eds of all varieties, including an elder, a fair and a martyr, the next king that most of us will have heard of is Ethelred the Unready, who came to the throne in 978. However, it's a case of meaning being lost in translation, because Unriad, which is what he was actually called, means poorly counselled in Anglo-Saxon, and it would seem that the unfortunate Ethelred might have benefited from some good advice. The Danes were still on the rampage, and Ethelred was no match for the Viking leader Svein Forkbeard, who seized the English throne in 1013. Forkbeard's reign was short-lived, as he died about 5 weeks later, and despite his wonderful name referring to the way he wore his beard, it's his son Canute who is much better remembered, and all because of another much-loved royal legend. King Canute ruled England from 1016 after a brief reversion to Ethelred's son, and he was one of the best monarchs the country had ever known. Wise and fair, Canute modernised the laws of the land. Although many believed he considered himself so important, he attempted to command the seas and the turn of the tide. However, this couldn't be further from the truth. Tired of his courtiers' flattery, when one insisted Canute could order the tide not to come in, Canute went down to the beach, set up his throne at the water's edge, and of course got wet, proving that he had no power over the elements, while at the same time exposing the courtier as very foolish indeed. When Canute died, he was succeeded firstly by his son Harold, and then his other son, Harthacnut. When he died, the throne passed again back to the Saxon line, and another son of Ethelred the Unready, who was also the half-brother of Harthacnut, known as Edward the Confessor, a title which was bestowed upon him because of his great piety. Nevertheless, Edward failed to produce a son and heir, and this caused a real problem, especially as it seems he promised the English throne to his brother-in-law Harold Godwinson and his distant cousin William, Duke of Normandy. Edward the Confessor died in 1066, a year familiar to us all because of the Battle of Hastings. When Harold became king, cousin William over in France was not content to give up his claim to the English throne. William was also a descendant of Alfred the Great, and when he set out to conquer England, there was no stopping him. Harold was killed in the Battle of Hastings, depicted in the Bayeux Tapestry as being shot by an arrow through the eye, and the event heralded the Norman period of English history, quite literally changing the face of the nation during William's well-documented Norman conquests. When William was crowned king at the newly constructed Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day 1066, he was ready to take control of the nation. Anglo-Saxon estates were confiscated and granted to Norman nobles, and needless to say, the natives got very restless. William and his nobles put down many revolts, building their characteristic castles and fortresses all over the land, including the original White Tower of the Tower of London, constructed in 1078. And to ensure his supremacy, William is also remembered for the compilation of the Domesday Book in 1085, an early form of census that recorded how land was being used, and more importantly for the Norman treasury, how much tax could be levied on the people of England. Not that William lived long enough to personally reap the benefits, as he died in 1087 after falling from his horse in France. It's important to remember that these early kings were military leaders as well as monarchs, and with lands in France and England, William certainly had his work cut out. After William I came his son William II, known as William Rufus because of his ruddy complexion. He too was kept busy, especially as the Scottish king Malcolm III tried, on more than one occasion, to invade his English neighbour, as did Welsh rebels unhappy with the Norman nobles occupying the border castles of the marshes. William Rufus, however, was not killed in battle, but in a hunting accident while out with friends in the New Forest, although the conspiracy theorists have a different version of events. Henry I, William's youngest brother, was crowned at Westminster Abbey in 1100, and it's been suggested that he may have had a hand in his brother's untimely death. Henry, nonetheless, pledged good governance and wisely neutralised any threat from Scotland by marrying the daughter of the troublesome, by now deceased, Malcolm III. But not everything ran to plan. His brother, the Duke of Normandy, attempted to overthrow Henry, and the king lost his only son William, who was drowned at sea. Now this is where it gets interesting. Henry I had a daughter, Matilda, who as a female was not expected to inherit the throne, but the king persuaded the barons to accept her as his lawful successor. This may have been fine in theory, but when Henry died in 1135, Matilda was usurped by her cousin, Stephen. Matilda may not have been crowned queen, but she didn't give up her claim to her father's throne without a fight. These were turbulent years characterised by civil war, only brought to a satisfactory conclusion when Stephen agreed to name Matilda's son, Henry Plantagenet, Count of Anjou, as his heir. Consequently, when Stephen died in 1154, he was the last Norman king of England, as Henry II became the first of the Plantagenets. Now, it's pretty obvious the Normans came from Normandy, but if you're wondering where the Plantagenets came from, it's actually all down to nickname. Geoffrey, Count of Anjou, Henry's father, always wore a sprig of flowering broom, Planta genista, and this is how he was known. When Henry II was crowned King of England in 1154, aged 21, he was already Count of Anjou and Touraine, as well as being Duke of Normandy and Aquitaine, which meant his French territories were more extensive than those owned by the King of France. Add to that the throne of England, and Henry's Angevin Empire stretched from the Solway Firth to the Pyrenees. So far we've focused on the monarchs and not mentioned their queens, but in the case of Henry II, his wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine, has to be one of the most fascinating historical characters of all time. The pair were married in France in 1152, the bride being 11 years her handsome groom senior. Eleanor had first been married to the King of France, but had been granted an annulment because they were so closely related, and when Henry came to the English throne, he brought with him a charismatic queen who was centuries ahead of her time. Just as Alfred's remembered for burning the cakes, there's one incident that is synonymous with Henry II, the bloody murder of Thomas à Becket in Canterbury Cathedral in 1170. As monarch, Henry had been determined to control the power of the church and appointed his friend Becket to the influential post of Archbishop of Canterbury in 1162. But Becket would not be swayed from his religious principles, and for 8 years thwarted the king's reforms, enraging Henry so much that on one occasion he screamed out, "Will not someone rid me of this turbulent priest?" Immediately, 4 of Henry's knights took him at his word and set off for Canterbury and murdered Becket at the high altar of the cathedral, and whether this was the king's intention or a tragic error, Henry II has gone down in the history books with blood on his hands. Other notable achievements in Henry's reign included the establishment of trial by jury and the acquisition of the title Lord of all Ireland to go with all the others in 1171 after a successful invasion. However, Henry II didn't die a happy man. His constant battle with his wife resulted in her being confined to the French castle of Chinon for years, and, not surprisingly, she sided with her son Richard in battle against her husband. Neither was his relationship with his sons much better, and he refused to name an heir until his dying breath in 1189, when he bequeathed the Angevin Empire to his 3rd son, Richard. And so we come to one of the best-loved English kings of all time, Richard the Lionheart, friend of Robin Hood, Crusader knight, and darling of literature. But just as some kings have been misrepresented as poor monarchs, Richard benefited from an overinflated reputation. Of the 10 years Richard ruled, he only spent 7 months of that time in England, while he plundered the nation's coffers and increased taxation to pay for his crusades in the Holy Land. Interestingly, it's Richard's younger brother John who generally gets the blame for this heavy taxation, especially in the legends of Robin Hood. Richard the Lionheart was only 41 when he died in 1199, shot by an archer in France while he was in search of buried treasure, and his tomb can be found in Fontevrault Abbey, next to those of his father Henry and his mother Eleanor, in the heart of the French countryside. Like Henry II, Richard named his heir as he was dying, and it was his brother John who has gone down in history, perhaps unfairly, as being as bad a king as Richard was good. King John's best known for signing the Magna Carta at Runnymede in 1215 to appease the warring barons, and this historic document was crucial in the establishment of English common law. When John died a year later, the English throne passed to his son, crowned King Henry III in 1216 at the age of 9 under a regency. However, when Henry took full control in 1227, he proved to be a most unpopular king, and the barons, quietened by Magna Carta, were soon on the rampage again. It fell to Henry's eldest son, Prince Edward, to put the rebellion down, which he did with great relish. When Henry III died in 1272, Edward was on crusade in the Holy Land, but returned to be crowned king in 1274. Edward I is often known by the name Longshanks because he was very tall, and he was also renowned for his savagery towards opponents. The Welsh certainly suffered at his hands when Wales was incorporated into his domain, and he was the first to appoint his eldest son Prince of Wales in 1301, a tradition that continues to this day. However, he's most famous for his barbaric treatment of the Scots. After deposing the Scottish king in 1296, he stole the Stone of Destiny from Scone Palace, a historic artefact used in the Scots coronation ceremony, and took it to Westminster Abbey, where it remained until its return to Edinburgh Castle in 1996. Nevertheless, when Edward I invaded Scotland, he didn't quite have it all his own way, thanks to the efforts of a now famous Scotsman by the name of William Wallace, whose armies beat the English at Stirling Bridge in 1297. Edward did defeat the Scots a year later at Falkirk, when Wallace was captured and taken to London, where he was executed. But when Robert the Bruce was crowned King of Scotland in 1306, the oppressed nation north of the border served notice that the English now had a fight on their hands. Upon the death of Edward I in 1307, ironically on his way north for another go at invading Scotland, his son Edward II, the first ever Prince of Wales, was crowned king. The new king didn't have the stomach for fighting the Scots, and Robert the Bruce assured Scottish independence in 1314 when he routed the English at the Battle of Bannockburn. Yet Edward II's most dangerous adversary proved to be his wife, Queen Isabella, who ran off with her lover, Roger Mortimer, and the pair seized power in the name of the king's eldest son, again called Edward. Edward II was imprisoned in Berkeley Castle, where he was brutally murdered in 1327 on the orders of Isabella, and has gone down in history as one of the most unfortunate kings of all time. When Edward III finally seized power from the regency of Roger Mortimer in 1330, his 50-year reign proved him to be an affable king, much loved by his people. However, when he died in 1377, Edward's most notable contribution to the history books was his declaration of himself as heir to the French throne, starting what would become the 100 Years' War. Sadly, though, his eldest son, Edward the Black Prince, predeceased his father, but having produced a son of his own before his untimely demise, Richard II came to the throne at the age of 10. Many believe Richard to have been a weak king, not least because of the play written by William Shakespeare about him. However, he crossed swords with his cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, who deposed Richard in 1399 to become Henry IV, the first king of the House of Lancaster, a branch of the Plantagenets. But his prize proved to be something of a poisoned chalice, with nothing but revolts and treasury shortages, and he died a rather disappointed man in 1430. Succeeded by his son Henry V, Henry IV would no doubt have been extremely proud of his heir. After reviving the 100 Years' War with France, his armies were victorious at the Battle of Agincourt, again made famous by one of Shakespeare's plays. As a result, upon his death in 1422, his son Henry VI became king, inheriting both the English and French thrones. Henry VI was a good man, but a weak king, and during his reign the English were thrown out of France after a campaign led in the first instance by Joan of Arc. The Plantagenet House of York also went into battle with Henry in the War of the Roses, which broke out in 1455, resulting in the Duke of York, the future Edward IV, deposing Henry in 1461. After much toing and froing, Henry VI was restored to the throne, but only for a very short time, as he was murdered in the Tower of London, very possibly by the Duke of Gloucester, who's also suspected of murdering Henry's son, who by rights would have become king. Consequently, Edward IV was restored to the English throne in 1471, the first king of the House of York. Despite his interrupted reign, Edward proved to be an able king who brought peace and prosperity to England. However, when he fell out with his brother George, the unfortunate sibling was found murdered in the Tower of London, something that was proving to be a regular occurrence. When Edward IV died in 1483, his young son Edward succeeded him. However, the boy's uncle claimed the child illegitimate and seized the throne for himself. The king in question was Richard III, and when Edward V and his younger brother, who were living in the Tower of London at the time, disappeared, suspicions certainly fell upon the new king. Richard III doesn't have the best of PR in royal history, and Shakespeare certainly did little to improve matters with his play, which portrays the king as a hunchback. However, his 2 years on the throne are to this day a source of much fascination. But when he died at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485, defeated by one Henry Tudor, the War of the Roses were at an end, as a new age was about to begin. Henry VII, with his Lancastrian ancestry, married Elizabeth of York in 1486, uniting the two branches of the Plantagenet family as Tudors. But when his eldest son Arthur died in 1503, leaving his young widow Catherine of Aragon in the care of Henry VII, a remarkable chapter in history was about to be written. Henry VII died in 1509, and his second son, Henry VIII, succeeded him. After receiving a dispensation from the Pope, the new king married Catherine of Aragon, his brother's widow, in the same year, in accordance with his father's wishes. These were early days for the new Tudor dynasty, and Henry was aware that he needed to produce an undisputed son and heir, an issue that would dominate his whole life and create a religious rift throughout the nation that would cost many their lives. Dutifully, Queen Catherine produced child after child, including 2 boys who died in infancy. However, the only surviving child was Mary, born in 1516. As Catherine, who was older than her husband, appeared less and less likely to produce an heir, Henry applied to the Pope for an annulment, claiming that his marriage was cursed because Catherine had been his brother's widow. When the Pope refused, Henry had the Act of Supremacy passed in 1533, making himself head of the English Church, breaking from Roman Catholicism, so a divorce could be granted. Henry went on to marry a further 5 times, and, as the rhyme goes, his wives were divorced beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. And here's a whistle-stop tour of Who's Who. Henry married Anne Boleyn in 1533, but her only surviving child was a daughter, Elizabeth, and Anne was beheaded for adultery in 1536. Next, Henry married Jane Seymour, just 11 days after Anne's execution, and in 1537 she gave birth to Edward, the male child Henry had been waiting for. But Jane's triumph was temporary. She died within weeks from postnatal complications. Henry next married Anne of Cleves on the strength of a portrait, but when he met her, she didn't fulfil his expectations, and although he couldn't stop the wedding in 1540, the marriage was annulled 6 months later, as Henry claimed it hadn't been consummated. Shortly after Anne of Cleves, Henry married the young, vivacious Catherine Howard in 1540, but, like Anne Boleyn, she was accused of adultery and beheaded. The last of Henry's wives, Catherine Parr, who he married in 1543, managed to avoid the fates of her predecessors until the king's death in 1547, only to die in childbirth a year later after marrying the brother of Henry's third wife, Jane Seymour. Although, as Henry wished, his son Edward VI succeeded him, he was just a child of 9, and the nation was governed by 2 protectors. However, when Edward contracted tuberculosis, his days were numbered, and he died in 1553 at the age of 15, leaving England quite literally in turmoil. The Duke of Northumberland, the then Protector of England, when Edward fell sick, persuaded the boy to name Lady Jane Grey as his heir, in order to keep the nation Protestant. Needless to say, Henry VIII's daughter Mary believed she had a much greater claim to the throne, but was a devout Catholic, just as her mother, Catherine of Aragon, had been. A pawn in a very dangerous game, the 16-year-old Lady Jane was manipulated onto the throne of England as what history often calls the 9 Days Queen. But when Mary and her Catholic supporters arrived in London, the unfortunate Lady Jane was imprisoned in the Tower of London until her execution in 1554. As soon as Queen Mary I took the throne, she set about restoring England to the Catholic faith, which she finalised in 1554, the same year that she married Philip of Spain. Many Protestants who refused to convert to Catholicism were burnt as heretics, and this is why this particular queen has gone down in history as Bloody Mary. Nevertheless, Mary suffered with the same anxiety as her father over producing an heir, and she failed to give birth to a live child. To make matters worse, her half-sister, Princess Elizabeth, had many supporters keen to depose Mary in her favour, which would mean a return to a Protestant England, something the Queen couldn't countenance, and Elizabeth did well to come out of the Tower of London, where she was imprisoned at one stage alive. When Mary died in 1558 at the age of 42, abandoned by Philip of Spain and childless, the crown passed to Elizabeth, and the Church of England was quickly restored in 1559. Throughout her reign, Elizabeth had many suitors, but she chose not to marry, claiming she was married to England. The Virgin Queen, as she became known, fought off the Spanish Armada, but the Catholics were a constant threat, and Elizabeth's cousin Mary, the Catholic Queen of Scotland, was used as a pawn in the fight for religious supremacy, just as Lady Jane Grey had been. There's often confusion about Mary I of England and Mary I of Scotland, but for Elizabeth, Mary Queen of Scots, her cousin, was one of her biggest problems. Eventually, faced with endless conspiracies with Mary seemingly at the heart of them, Elizabeth, who had kept Mary moving from castle to castle as her prisoner, finally signed her death warrant and had her executed in 1587. Elizabeth I reigned for an incredible 45 years, but when she died in 1603, the inevitable problem of who would succeed the Virgin Queen meant the end of the Tudors. Ironically, it was the son of her cousin, Mary Queen of Scots, James VI of Scotland, a Stuart, who became James I of England, at last uniting the nations to be governed by the same sovereign. The people had loved Elizabeth, but James I was not a popular king, and on the 5th of November 1605, Guy Fawkes and his fellow conspirators attempted to blow up the Houses of Parliament and the king. When James I died in 1625, his son Charles I succeeded him, and was, like his father before him, a great believer in the divine right of kings. Charles thought he was only answerable to God and no one else, but eventually this resulted in civil war, with the parliamentarians led by Oliver Cromwell in 1642. When Charles and his royalists were defeated, the king was tried and executed, leaving Britain without a monarchy for the period of interregnum between 1649 and 1660, when the nation was overseen by the Lord Protector, Oliver Cromwell. But Cromwell, just like the kings in whose footsteps he'd followed, planned his son to succeed him. However, Richard Cromwell simply wasn't up to the task, and in 1660 the monarch was restored when the son of Charles I, yes, you've guessed it, Charles II, returned to carry on the Stuart line. Charles II was glamorous, and brought an element of fun back to life after Oliver Cromwell's Puritanism, but he converted to Catholicism on his deathbed in 1685 and, with no issue, the throne passed to his brother James II, a practicing Catholic who intended to restore links with Rome, even if it meant going to war. However, when his wife gave birth to a son, a Catholic heir to the throne, tensions escalated. With the national crises again developing over religion, the Protestant William of Orange was invited to take the English throne, to jointly rule with his wife Mary, the daughter of James II. The royal couple were crowned in 1689 after James II went to live in exile in France. Sadly, William and Mary had no children to follow them, and after Mary's death from smallpox in 1694 at Kensington Palace, William ruled on alone until his own death in 1702. But the year before, the Act of Settlement was passed to ensure a Protestant succession, and when Queen Anne, the second daughter of James II, came to the throne in 1702, by which time all of her 18 children had predeceased her, the nearest Protestant relation was the German Sophia, Electress of Hanover, who became her heir. Despite all the efforts made for a smooth Protestant succession, Sophia died shortly before Queen Anne in 1714, so her son George, who spoke no English, came to London to be crowned the first Hanoverian king. This was far from popular with the British people, and with a Jacobite rising starting in Scotland in 1715, planning to restore the Old Pretender, the Catholic son of James II, to the throne, all was not quite as straightforward with the Hanoverian succession as had been hoped. When George I died in 1727, he was succeeded by his son George II, despite the fact that as Prince of Wales he'd fought constantly with his father. And history repeated itself as the new king's quarrels with his own son Frederick, Prince of Wales, were legendary. And as well as disharmony on the domestic front, George II was still far from popular with the people of Britain. When the Jacobites made another attempt to restore the Stuart line by putting Charles Edward Stuart, the Bonnie Prince, son of the Old Pretender, on the throne, they came incredibly close to succeeding. Bonnie Prince Charlie landed in Scotland in 1745, and after a conclusive victory over the British army at the Battle of Preston Pans, he marched south and got as far as Derby, with London in his sights. But a moment of indecision resulted in a retreat with disastrous consequences, and the rebellion ended at the bloody Battle of Culloden, where the victorious British took their revenge. The Bonnie Prince fled to Skye, rowed by the lovely Flora MacDonald, before escaping to France, and the Hanoverian George II continued his reign. It's possible George II wasn't too troubled when his heir, Frederick, the Prince of Wales, who he loathed, died unexpectedly after allegedly being hit on the head by a cricket ball, especially as he'd already ensured the succession, having given the old king a grandson. George II died in 1760, and his grandson became the next George in line, the third, and he was the first Hanoverian king born in Britain. Many believe George III was mad, and he certainly showed all the signs of being so on a number of occasions. What he actually suffered from was a physical condition called porphyria that gave every indication of mental illness. But like all the Georges who'd preceded him, George III had a poor relationship with his eldest son, the Prince of Wales, who he considered a disgrace because of his wild living. Nevertheless, the future George IV had to take over as regent because of his father's ill health between 1811 and the king's death in 1820. When finally crowned as George IV, the prince who'd waited so long to be king had a relatively short reign of just over 2 years, and one of his main claims to fame is the fact that he transformed Buckingham House into the beautiful royal palace we know and love today. And finally, after George IV, Britain got a king with a different name, William IV, his predecessor's brother. Despite speculation about fathering numerous offspring, George IV had only one legitimate daughter, who died in 1817, leaving no issue. William IV was 64 when he became king. Despite having plenty of illegitimate offspring, he had no issue to legally succeed him. When he died in 1837, it was the end of the line for the Hanoverian men, and the crown passed to an 18-year-old niece of William IV by the name of Victoria. For historians, the reign of Queen Victoria is a great source of fascination, She managed to restore the popularity of the monarchy in Great Britain. When Victoria married the German Prince Albert, to honour him, the royal house became known as Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. Their happy union produced 9 children, who would marry into all the major European royal families. It's hard to find much Queen Victoria had in common with her Hanoverian predecessors, except that both she and Albert found the wild behaviour of their eldest son, the Prince of Wales, intolerable, resulting in a very strained relationship. When Prince Albert died in 1861, the Queen was distraught and blamed the behaviour of the Prince of Wales for her husband's death. Waiting to become Edward VII was going to go on for many years, and when Queen Victoria died in 1901, after more than 50 years on the throne, the new king was destined for a much shorter reign. As the 20th century dawned, Edward VII brought with him a sense of freedom to the people of Britain after the constraints of the Victorian age. But when he died in 1910, the threat of war with Germany was looming large. George V had never imagined he would become king as the second son of Edward VII. But when his older brother died unexpectedly, he took his responsibilities very seriously and was a popular king at a time when his German ancestry could have been a problem. The German Kaiser, William II, causing all the problems, was actually a cousin of the British king, who considerately changed the name of the royal house from the German Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to Windsor, showing precisely where his loyalties lay. Nevertheless, World War I, fought between 1914 and 1918, resulted in the king suffering ill health in the post-war years, and when he died at Sandringham in 1936, another war with Germany was threatening to disturb the peace. At such a difficult time politically, everyone had high hopes of the new king, Edward VIII, the eldest son of George V. But his love for the American divorcee Wallis Simpson resulted in his abdication in December 1936. The responsibility for saving the British monarchy on this occasion fell to the quietly spoken Duke of York and his young family, and with little time for preparation, he became King George VI as Britain again headed for war. George VI had 2 daughters, and the eldest, Elizabeth, became the heiress presumptive, with more time than her father to get used to the idea of becoming queen. Again, like his father before him, George VI found himself king of a nation at war in 1939, and the 7 years of the Second World War took a considerable toll on his health. Yet the young Princess Elizabeth could never have guessed she would lose her father and become queen quite as soon as she did. When George VI died in 1952, the new Queen Elizabeth II promised herself to the nation, and her coronation in Westminster Abbey in 1953 was watched by people everywhere as it was televised. Moving into the media age, Queen Elizabeth II has seen her family face a hungry world press, constantly searching for the latest royal news stories. In 1981, her eldest son, Charles, the Prince of Wales, married Lady Diana Spencer, and their every move was under scrutiny. After securing the succession with 2 sons, princes William and Harry, the marriage sadly ended in divorce in 1996, and a year later Diana, Princess of Wales, was killed in a tragic car accident on the streets of Paris. As a result, the Queen has carried the responsibility for leading her family into the 21st century, as she still works tirelessly to guide the future heirs to the throne as they too face a lifetime of service to the nation. And on that very positive note, as the next generation of the British monarchy steps into the breach, as William Shakespeare so eloquently put it, who can say what the future might bring? We've all come a long way from Boudica, the queen of the ancient Britons, leaving a wake of destruction wherever she went, to Elizabeth II leading gently by example, leaving only happy memories for those of her adoring people fortunate enough to meet her. As the history books tell, even with royalty, things don't always go necessarily to plan with happy ever after endings. But one thing's absolutely for certain: a monarchy that can adapt to the age in which they live will always survive and get stronger, whatever might have gone before.